here for the last 2 days and have enjoyed all of these panels and the exhibition, and I'm looking forward to the Poetry Slam right afterwards. Yes? Okay. So our first speaker of the final panel is Rainer Hanschig, who is the author of 2 novels, The Acolytes and The Application, and a hybrid text created in collaboration with Federico Gori, Shattering the Muses. He's also the editor of Richard Foreman's Plays and Films and Wordsworth's Fragments, and the translator of Baudelaire's My Heart Laid Bare and Other Texts, as well as Joseph Kessel's Army of Shadows. Antje is a prolific writer of essays on Nietzsche, and he is the founder of Contra Mundum Press and Hyperion on the Future of Aesthetics. He's currently working on 2 novels and a photojournalism project with Beryl Hunter. I think we need to find something else for Rainer to do in his spare time. Not enough projects. I will let him present his project himself. Rainer.
The ancient Greek thinker Heraclitus observes in one of his fragments that physis cryptestai phylae, nature or being, is that which loves to hide, and in the Veil of Isis, Pierre Hadot outlines 5 possible ways of translating and thus interpreting Heraclitus's cryptic statement. The constitution of each thing tends to hide. It's hard to know. The constitution of each thing wants to be hidden. It does not want to be revealed. The origin tends to hide itself. The origin of things is hard to know. What causes things to appear tends to make them disappear. What causes birth tends to cause death. Form, or appearance, tends to disappear. What is born wants to die. These last 2 translations, Hadot says, are probably closest to what Heraclitus meant, since they have the antithetical character that is typical of his thought. Heidegger himself translates the fragment as such: being, emerging appearance, intrinsically inclines towards self-concealment, denoting that being is something which paradoxically reveals yet simultaneously conceals itself. Heraclitus' statement is central to Heidegger's philosophy of being, and in On the Way to Language, since physis can be equated with the logos, Heidegger argues that language, but one manifestation of being, refuses to reveal itself in words and therefore withholds its nature from us. What it does reveal is the mere surface or appearance of itself, not, let's say, its dark matter. The moment when language reveals itself as language is, Heidegger says, the moment when we cannot find the right word for something that concerns us, carries us away, oppresses or encourages us. Then we leave unspoken what we have in mind, and without rightly giving it thought, undergo moments in which language itself has distantly and fleetingly touched us with its essential being. To experience such, which is an event of subtle but palpable displacement, is to undergo an experience with language itself. Even the very title of Heidegger's book suggests that language is not something close to us, but something that we are always in the midst of approaching. We are on the way to language. If this withholding is part of the very character or nature of language, then there is an originary displacement at the heart of existence itself. Language, or being, remains always distant to us, something from which we are permanently displaced. It touches us only distantly and fleetingly. Therefore, a radical displacement pulses within that which defines our very being. And so we are always unheimlich, schismatic, homeless figures rifted internally as if by a Gedankenstricke that keeps us eternally estranged. This foundational displacement finds its greatest echo and concentration in certain writers, and it is they who undergo various forms of displacement, not to speak of frequently severe dislocations due to social, economic, or political and other exigencies. A central concern of my book, Shattering the Muses, is the eclipsing of the logos and creative force within various individuals, from writers to artists and philosophers, as well as both culture and civilization. Radical displacement is therefore a kind of central nervous system of the book, which is an enactment and staging of the fundamental chiasmic unity of creation and destruction. When do individuals and cultures and civilizations rise out of catastrophe and destruction, and when do they descend into silence, either temporarily or possibly permanently, and thus remain forever shattered? The book is refracted or interspersed with the account of a phantasmatic figure named Renato Naso, an editor and writer who, through being separated from city, country, and language, three principal elements out of which a home is forged, undergoes an extreme displacement that results in his slow disintegration, a shattering from which he will not recover, though before his self-immolation he finishes writing a long, dormant work toward a genealogy of the sublime. His journey from what was once his home, a place that had become dead to him, to his next home, a place which remains unknown to him, and which he is in search of throughout the time of the book, involves the essentially forced abandonment of nearly his entire library, his sole valuable possession, the objects that make up his trade and life. When forced to discard books at the airport since he has exceeded the weight limit of his luggage, Renato stacks them one atop another as if building a stele or pillar of some kind. But other travelers soon take possession of them. The event of having to discard his books, and their being avidly seized by others, feels to him like a form of Promethean corporal maceration. Later, he will avow that to be bereft of his library is to be bereft of existence. This event precedes the depiction of Swiss-French writer Blaise Cendrars being forced to flee occupied Paris due to his being wanted by the Gestapo, the Nazis' confiscation and pulping of Chez l'Armée Anglaise, his Paris Soir articles written for the British Expeditionary Force, and the Gestapo's occupation of his apartment and destruction of his library and papers. Those events lead to the eclipse of Cendrars' personality, and for many years, while hiding out in southern France during the German occupation, the formerly prodigious writer is silenced. The logos is shattered within him, the blank page becomes a void, and he does not write for 3 years. Eventually, Cendrars does return to the word, provoked to create again by a number of factors, primarily the story of a friend's encounter with a German officer, which evoked his own experiences in the First World War when he lost his writing arm. To write, he says, is to be burned alive, but it is also to be reborn from the ashes. The eventuality of being what Heidegger calls Weltarm, poor in world, and Weltlos, worldless, to become a kind of animal, remains, however, a continuously impending threat. The devastation suffered under the occupation of France forced many writers to respond strictly with silence, or violently thrust them into worldlessness. How can one write? Asked the poet René Lacote. I can sense the deep connection that links a writer to his error as I had never sensed it before. All the frameworks of thought in which I thought and lived have perhaps been destroyed. I feel completely insecure when I write. My thoughts seem to me those of a madman. It is the world that is mad around me, but the effect is the same. The connection between me and it has been destroyed. Polish poet Tadeusz Razowitz, whose brother died in a concentration camp, undergoes a shattering which thrusts him into worldlessness too, and it fissures his relationship to Fusis. The production of beauty to induce aesthetic experiences, Razowitz said, became for him a harmless but ludicrous and childish preoccupation. Only disgust could serve Razowitz as a premise and incentive for writing. With Samuel Beckett, in being forced to flee Paris during World War II, in being separated from his library, from an archive around which his words were born, a literary freedom erupted, as over his recent past the fractured eye of a dissolved cogito grew more and more eclipsed from English, saw it as a veil in need of rending so as to reach the concealed nothingness, the sole viable form of expression for the writer, where skeptical resignation is forever sustained, not as negation, but as the optimal mode of knowledge. Consider Beckett's analysis of Hölderlin, whose only successes, Beckett said, are the points where Hölderlin's poems go on, falter, stammer, and then admit failure and are abandoned. At such points he was most successful, when he tried to abandon the spurious magnificence. Beckett's experience with language and his description of Hölderlin's is akin to Heidegger's view of such, just as Beckett's attempt to reach the concealed nothingness is an attempt at having language reveal itself as language, of Beckett's search to find the right word, to be touched, as Heidegger says, by the essential being of language. During the occupation, Beckett seeks to create a literature of unwords. I am starting a logoclass league, he tells a friend. Explaining what logoclasm is to him, he uses a metaphor that evokes the strain, stress, and anguish born of his struggle to wrestle with the logos. The idea is ruptured writing, so that the void may protrude like a hernia. And in a letter written to Axel Cowan in 1937, Beckett proclaims that there is no higher goal for today's writer than to drill one hole after another in language until that which lurks behind, be it something or nothing, starts seeping through. Writing thus led to a different kind of silence for Beckett, and it is through the logos that he hears the alogos. Forget unifying historical chaos, forget clarifying individual chaos, forget anthropomorphizing the inhuman necessities that provoke chaos. Bring the straws, the flotsam, names, dates, the first and final dash, not the final animism, but the pure incoherence of times and men and places, the amusing, the laugh, the long, silent guffaw of the knowing non-exister. It is in words that Beckett encloses nothingness. It is in words that silence can live. Conscripted into forced labor and essentially tortured to death in various camps, even in the midst of disaster, of knowing oblivion, of barbed wire skies and abominable privations, Hungarian Jewish poet Miklos Radnóti continues to write, inscribing poems on scraps of paper and in secretly obtained notebooks. Writing, the logos does not go silent in this poet. It is fundamental to his being, as intrinsic to him as breathing. All of his verses of this period are written in careful, precise, balanced handwriting, even down to Caesora's, the tight, controlled measuring of form acting as a bulwark against chaos and degradation, albeit a fragile one. As entire labor camps are liquefied and thousands of prisoners are sent on forced marches, Radnóti continues writing. An unknown subjectum endures within the poet in the midst of the terrors of World War II. And as they continue and increase, the word still does not go silent in Radnóti. Instead, it persists, tenaciously, sounding in his every step, with each struggle, before every abjection, with each hopeless day, a taut, finely tuned thread. In the jaw of oblivion, he writes, his recent sufferings recorded on 15 September 1944 in the poem Forced March, whose staccato rhythms, halted lines, intentionally spaced phrases evoke the strains, exactitude, and severities of the march itself. His feet cracked with wounds, his mouth rife with abscesses, as hundreds are executed around him, and he and his companions huddle together like beasts, subsisting on scraps of bread and other remnants of food, haystacks and houses burning, he continues to write. The violinist Miklos Lorsi, one of Radnoti's friends, is shot. He rises, struggling to continue marching. As his friends attempt to lend him aid, an SS officer shouts, "He is still struggling," then shoots Lorsi again, killing him this time, his body rolling over Radnoti's, making his own death more palpable. On 31 October 1944, 3 weeks after witnessing his friend's murder, Radnoti writes his final missive from the Inferno, inscribing it on the back of a medicine bottle label. With whatever means necessary, the word must be recorded. I fell next to him. His body rolled over. It was tight as a string before it snaps. Shot in the back of the head. This is how you'll end. Just lie quietly, I said to myself. Patience flowers into death now. Der spricht nach auf, I heard above me. Dark, filthy blood was drying on my ear. Radnoti is compelled to describe what he witnesses, to record with the most tenuous of hopes, or with courageous fragility, brutalities and barbarities. Will they be heard? Writing in the midst of disaster, writing the disaster itself, giving us a poetic record of an inferno. He struggles with all his being to record language as it reveals itself to him, to inscribe its essential being. Poetry is his anchor, and his poem to his friend Lorsi is his last. While the word does not go silent in René Char, as a figure of the French resistance, he adopts the code name Capitaine Alexander and refuses to publish, even in clandestine journals. And so, for 6 years, although he writes, his word is suffused with silence. Is it that no poetry after, or to be even more exacting, during Auschwitz is possible? Or that we cannot bear the demand of the word, the image, the tone, the scent that rises within us with such energy that it forces us to record even its shards, its febrile reverberations, its distant and pale echoes, its short circuits, its schismatic eruptions as they tremble in our veins? Still, in the midst of impending disaster, of actual disaster, some write, some record, some kaleidoscope reality. Still, before our knowledge of erasure, of desecration, of knowledge become fragmentary or legend, some continue, knowing oblivion is before us. What one can write is not an aesthetics of beauty, but the work of horror, the grotesque, the monstrous, the Marseillan. In the midst of such knowledge, Shaw writes what will become the leaves of Hypnos, and he writes knowingly of the ephemerality of his gesture. These notes owe nothing to self-love, to the short story, the maxim, or the novel. A fire of dry grass might just as well have been their editor. The title of his work contains this knowledge too, a work as fragile and impermanent as a leaf, which lasts but a season, then bursts into flame-like colors, then falls, crumbles, and disintegrates, crushed underfoot or incinerated like a pyre or burnt offering. And the ephemerality of the work, its insignificance is made evident in atrocity. For the thread can be broken by barbarism, silence can usurp the word, or our ability to listen, to hear the logos, displacing us from it. The sight of tortured blood led once to losing the thread, reduced their importance to nothing. They were written under stress, in anger, fear, emulation, disgust, guile, furtive meditation, the illusion of the future, friendship, love. In the search for knowledge, Rimbaud spoke of undergoing unspeakable torments, that confronting such requires complete faith and superhuman strength, for they are powerful enough to reduce one to an invalid, to make one into a master criminal. It is in the midst of such exigent historical events that the rigor of Rimbaud's poetic demand finds its incandescent summit. Despite what he witnesses, from terrors to the assassination of friends, the word does not die in Char, but reflects the exacting pulse of his epoch. Threat, risk, tragedy, pessimism, hypocrisy, each moment, even each second, sometimes pregnant with the violent sculpting force of being. And before the monstrosity erupting within history, the poet centers himself in the storm, desubjectivizes himself to assure the coming again of justice. The word is a form of hope against trauma, or a record that carries trauma within it, embodies wounds if it can withstand the shattering force, a force which itself seeks to be recorded and yet is in constant war with poiesis. As Ionesco wrote in his journal, words have killed images or are concealing them. A civilization of words is a civilization distraught. Words create confusion. Words are not the word. The fact is that words say nothing. This view of the elusiveness and wily character of the Logos strongly echoes Heidegger's view of phusis. And Arthur Adamov will also note in The Confession, a record of his spiritual crisis and withdrawal from literature, that words, those guardians of meaning, are not immortal or invulnerable. Like men, words suffer. Some may survive, others are incurable. In the night, everything is confused. There are no more names, no more forms. In the midst of the war itself, Adamov avowed that words were worn, threadbare, filed down, and that they have become the carcass of words, phantom words. Perhaps it is not that words themselves are void of sense, but that our use of them becomes worn, threadbare, denuded, that when we write without undergoing an experience with language, our use of language will only ever be empty, an expression not of phusis, but of our inability to listen or to be touched by phusis. To Max Picard, the word not only brings things out of silence, it also produces the silence in which they can disappear. And in Brock's The Death of Virgil, there is a similar Heideggerian view of the word. The more he penetrated into the flooding sound and was penetrated by it, the more unattainable, the greater, the graver and more elusive became the word. A floating fire, sea-heavy, sea-light, notwithstanding it was still the word. He could not hold fast to it, and he might not hold fast to it. Incomprehensible and unutterable for him. It was the word beyond speech. I have outlined numerous cases from shattering the muses of astonishment and silencing, of a wrestling with the Logos, if not of near madness, and each of them are states of disquieting ecstasy, moments of being out of place, or of being cast from one's house of being driven out of one's mind like Lacote and others, displaced from one's relationship with phusis. As Elizabeth Borker wrote, I break open stars and find nothing, and again nothing, and then a word in a foreign tongue. This experience, however, is not limited to writers alone. The reader also undergoes such states of being, for the degree to which the work of such writers is even accessible to us remains a question. As Blanchot observes, no work, be it the most immediately contemporary one, is at our disposal, for we must make ourselves receptive to it. Works escape us and are estranged from us. When Beckett finally presented Watt to publishers, one said it was too wild and unintelligible and not fit for allocating any of our very limited supply of paper to its production. Another publisher was baffled by it, responding by saying with hostility that it was too difficult. What is it that this Dublin air does to these writers, he asked. The failure here is not necessarily with Beckett's work itself or any other similarly intractable work, but with the reader, and his or her refusal to become receptive to the work, to patiently move through and beyond estrangement, or to live with it, to eschew understanding, and to live with the ecstasy of displacement, to be unnerved, and in that condition to know that we are undergoing something. Works of this kind are works which have captured something of the essence of being, and therefore withhold their nature from us. The intractability we face is the attempt of the work to reveal itself as it is. It is the work's distantly and fleetingly touching us with its essential being. In refusing that, and in seeking the comfort of always understanding, we are refusing the fundamental character of existence itself, of the paradoxical event of phusis as its veil both blinds and illuminates us.
Since there are three presenters on this panel, I think we'll hold our questions till the end. Though I imagine there are reactions to this incredibly beautiful film. So, yes. Our next presenter is Professor Paul Shallow, who is the chair of the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures, in which he teaches Japanese. He is an award-winning translator as well as a scholar. He's also one of the first people I ever met at Rutgers just over 20 years ago, so we've been friends for more than 2 decades. And I should also point out that if Paul is not the most popular professor in the humanities at Rutgers with vast numbers of students, he's certainly among the top 5. Paul, we're looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you for the overly generous introduction. I really appreciate that. I was thinking Reiner had put in practice a kind of radical displacement by not being in front of us in the previous presentation. So I'm going to be here. And I've prepared some slides. And just briefly, I want to introduce the idea of writing against the atomic bomb. In 1995, there were several books that came out around the time of the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that I guess I can use the word capitalized on the 50th anniversary. And one of them was a wonderful book by John Treat called Writing Ground Zero. And so after I read that, I thought, I want to make a course about the atomic bomb. So in 2000, I started teaching a course called The Atomic Bomb in Japanese Literature and Film. And so I've been teaching that for 16, 17 years now. And this opportunity today to talk about sort of the atomic bomb and in the context of writing and displacement, I really appreciate. So I wanted to thank Mary because it gave me a chance to think kind of from a slightly different angle that I hadn't necessarily explored before. So I, like the previous film that we just saw, it's a literature of trauma that I'm talking about, and so it's going to be equally depressing. I always tell my students, you know, welcome to the most depressing class at Rutgers. And they kind of laugh, and then at the end of the semester they say, yeah. So literatures of trauma. In this case, we're talking about, am I pressing the wrong direction? Oh, it's off. Okay, that explains it. There. I was thinking about the idea of displacement in terms of, you know, the word migration, and this set of words like immigrants, refugees, internally displaced, and the traumas that they experience. And I wanted to sort of recast the idea of displacement here by shifting it to movement of peoples, to no movement of peoples. In fact, it's the place that moves. And when you're from a city like Hiroshima or Nagasaki that gets obliterated or erased from the map, you become a different kind of sort of displaced person. You're in place, but everything that's familiar is gone. And it's really interesting to think about this in relation to some of the earlier talks yesterday and today, how similar the trauma is, even though the displacement is so radically different. I'm going to focus on three hibakusha writers. The hibakusha are, it's a name given to those who were bombed and survived. And so they're sometimes called survivor writers. And the first of these was Hara Tamiki. And he was a writer, but very apolitical. And he was age 40 in 1945 when he experienced the bombing. And the second is Kurihara Sadako, and she was age 32 in 1945. And she was sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, a sort of radical leftist opposing nationalism and often thrown in jail along with her husband. And she also experienced the bomb in 1945. And the third one I'm going to talk about is Takenishi Hiroko. And she was a 16-year-old schoolgirl at the time of the bombing. So they all bring sort of different maybe life stages and political positions or lack of political positions to their writing. But it kind of highlights the arbitrariness of something like an atomic weapon. So talking about Hara Tamiki, I was thinking, you know, what is it? What's his method or technique to express displacement? And I came up with an example of what I'll call unnatural orthography. And this might connect to the earlier film we just watched, you know, what does it mean to write a work of horror? And he's kind of invented, I think, this technique because this story, Summer Flowers, was written in 1946, and it's one of the very first works of atomic bomb fiction. And he has just spent 2 nights on the riverbank hearing people scream in agony and not wake in the morning. And he wakes up with, cold bodies all around him, and the city has burned down overnight. And by the 3rd day, he and his companions are ready to leave the riverbank. And so this passage occurs midway in the story when they're leaving the riverbank and heading to a place of refuge outside the destroyed city. And there's a line, somehow I can capture my impressions of this area better in capital letters. That's how the translator translates it. So here I set down the following stanza. And the translator uses capital letters then to write this poem, which is sort of abruptly inserted in the prose narrative. Broken pieces, glittering, and gray-white cinders stretch out like a vast panorama. The strange rhythm of human corpses burned red. Was all this real? Could it be real? The world left behind after suddenly being stripped bare. Alongside overturned streetcars, horses, bellies distended, the smell of electric wires, smoldering and sizzling. And then it picks up the prose narration. The wagon proceeded along the road through endless destruction. I guess what I want to highlight about this is that if you translated that literally, it would be somehow I can capture my impressions of this area better in katakana letters. And katakana is the script that is used primarily in Japanese to write foreign loan words. So it's a kind of script associated with foreign or alien languages or words. And the fact that he is in this landscape and uses an orthography that is so unnatural is, I think, his way of expressing the trauma and the sense of displacement. So then I thought it might be interesting to look at the original here. And you have the prose, which you read, and you go along, and it's all written in natural Japanese, which is a mixture of the kanji and the hiragana. And then you get to this poem, which is inserted, and you can see that the katakana is a much more angular script, and visually it sort of jumps out at you on the page. And the effect is very different from capital letters in English, which as a sort of orthography, I think we usually respond to as emphatic rather than alien or alienating. And so it's one of those things that is difficult to translate because it's an orthographic convention, and it's an orthographic convention that doesn't have a sort of exact cognate in our English idea of fonts. And so I think that Haratamiki was incredibly original, maybe, in coming up with this way of capturing the strangeness of walking through his city that was no more. And I wanted to point out that since then, typically when people write about the atomic bombed Hiroshima, they write it using the katakana, even though the normal writing is using the Chinese characters or kanji. They're both read Hiroshima, Hiroshima, but one is the alien word, and Nagasaki, again, in katakana. And It's sometimes referred to as a poisoned script in those contexts, in the sense of a irradiated city that's being conjured by writing it not in the normal orthography, which should be the characters, but rather the unnatural katakana. And it was interesting in 2011, after the March 11th earthquake and tidal wave, and then the meltdown of the nuclear core of 3 of the, what are they called? The reactors, thank you. 3 of the reactors at Fukushima, in the press, they started to write Fukushima using katakana. And the people of Fukushima Prefecture objected. They said, you know, it was just Fukushima Daiichi power plant that melted down. You're kind of treating our entire prefecture as if it's contaminated. Please stop it. And actually, the press agreed to stop writing Fukushima using the katakana because it was offensive to the citizens of Fukushima. It's interesting, though, the citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki generally embrace the katakana writing, and they use it themselves to signify the legacy of contamination and destruction. So the next writer, a poet that I thought I would focus on, is Kurihara Sadako. And as I said, she was a sort of very politically engaged leftist in the 30s. And she was 32 years old when she was bombed in 1945. And here, I'm trying to identify her technique of expressing displacement, and I'm focusing on the idea of superimposing of different strata. And one of them is archaeological, and the other, kind of metaphorically then, is psychological, or maybe the archaeology is a metaphor for the psychological displacement. So she has a poem called City Underground, and I'm just going to look at the last stanza, the last section of it with you. This was written in August 1952, and typically, if you're writing in August, you're aware of the anniversary on August 6th of the bombing of Hiroshima and August 9th of Nagasaki. So it's a very, just the indication of the date means, okay, we're 7 years later and she's feeling something powerful. So she's written about city underground, and the final section is, finally covered over, the city underground will become a layer of rubble and bones, the 20th century's atomic stratum. It will bring a gleam to the eyes of archaeologists. Hiroshima, now that was a civilization. And she's, I think, making fun of or playing with maybe the idea of like a buried Pompeii, or Rome, the eternal city that's been sacked 6 times and rebuilt 7 times. And archaeologists love to, you know, dig it up and revel in the glories of that civilization. So here, it's a very bitter reference to those layers, not producing some gleaming insights, but really horrors that are under, you know, the existing modern city of Hiroshima. And she also has a poem called The Hiroshima No One Serenades. And you notice that this was written in July, so she's preparing herself or steeling herself for August 6th. This would be the 15th anniversary. And she's talking about the Hiroshima that no one serenades. And this phrase, serenading a city, I think is a reference to, the international attention that's directed at Hiroshima on August 6th, with foreign dignitaries visiting and wreaths being placed, at the various memorial sites in the center of the city in Peace Park. And so it's a very public serenading of the bombed city. And even though they're remembering the bombing, she doesn't really buy it, you could say, in this poem, because she says, "Oh, sealed off Hiroshima, no one serenades. Underneath the Hiroshima, people do serenade, refracting in my soul, and with that summer day, piercing my soul. But I sing for myself and for the other me." And in Japanese, singing is to create poetry. The word poem is the same as song. But I sing for myself and for the other me. You have here this fragment itself, one of them that still belongs to that buried city that no one is serenading, and yet she's existing in this, above ground city of Hiroshima. So this displacement expressed through these strata turns into a psychological fracture or stratum in her mind, in her heart, as I see it in this poem. Again, this was the final section of the poem only. Then the final author that I thought I would look at, and she's not a poet but a short story writer, is Takenishi Hiroko. And she was the one who was a 16-year-old schoolgirl when the bomb fell. She happened to be having her period that day on August 6th, and her mother said, "Why don't you stay home from school?" And all of her girl classmates, she attended a girls' school, died. And so this text that I'm going to look at with you has some aspects similar to Kurihara's of superimposing strata. One of them is memory, so superimposed on reality, and the other is the past impinging on the present. So it's a little more abstract, I think, than Kurihara Sadako in many ways. The other technique that I observe here, where she's expressing a kind of displacement, is through the unstable subjectivity of her heroine in the story, named Aki, the protagonist or narrator. And it's a little bit, it resembles in some ways the split in that poem by Kurihara between myself and my other me. But she also does something that Kurihara in her poetry doesn't do, which is that Takenishi Hiroko refuses to name the city. So you read this entire short story and you never encounter the word Hiroshima. It's, in some ways it engages the reader because you become a producer of the text in the sense that you contribute the knowledge that this is Hiroshima that's being written about. And I think it's an interesting technique to consider in light of the previous film that we saw where, the loss of words, here it's almost like an active refusal to state the name. And it engages the reader in interesting ways. So the loss of logos, I think in her hands becomes really interesting and productive. And I'd like to also highlight the sense in which it's a secondary destruction of the city, right? So she's kind of replaying and mimicking the destruction of the city by refusing to name it. And yet it has the opposite effect, honoring the city, you could say. Although she's not a poet, In this story, The Right, which Takenishi wrote in 1963, there's a recurring phrase which I think makes the short story kind of symphonic, almost like a recurring, melody or musical phrase. And it's, Aki had never seen so-and-so's dead body. And in the course of the short story, she returns to this phrase multiple times, and each time it's one of her high school classmates whose name she inserts there, and then she mulls over, what if I just got on the train and actually she just stepped off out of another door and we just missed each other? Because I've never seen her dead body, so who knows? And this constantly haunted by the possibility that because she's never seen their dead bodies, her friends could be walking around somewhere. It's a kind of displacement, a bizarre state of anxiety that she's living with through this recurring refrain. And I just wanted to highlight in closing the narration of A Remembered City. Again, remember, it's not ever stated anywhere that this is Hiroshima. Its present condition, its broad paved streets, its tall buildings, its airports, its foreign cars, its stadium, its cinemas, its bars, all those things are enough to make one doubt the reality of what once happened in that place. From now on, too, new schools will be put up. More and more trees will line the city streets. There will be more and more roller coasters in more amusement parks. But there are times, nevertheless, when I'm struck with the dread premonition that suddenly, one day, all those tall buildings will come tumbling down. I have visions of the pavements splitting open, of the foreign cars abandoned on the streets and turned to lumps of burnt down metal. They will be like these other things in the world of my memory that in a twinkling were all changed and lost. I sort of highlighted that last phrase. And it continues. And this is true not only of that place as it is now, all these familiar things about me every day, this table, this bookshelf, this mirror, this clock, these people boxed into their several compartments, and standing here and holding all that, this block of apartments, the streetlights, the suspension bridge, the superhighway, the lockers in the drafting room, the bones of kindly, gentle people. It seems to me I hear the sound of all these crumbling down, and I myself am nothing more than another of these things, doomed to crumble. Aki thinks of her own self, her body blown to bits, reduced to chalky handfuls, left exposed to every wind. And I italicized the last line to show that there's a shift here in the narration from I to suddenly, she's third person, Aki. And this fracture is part of the evidence of her trauma and this displacement from the place that she called home. And so just to wrap it up, even though these people were still in Hiroshima after they survived the bombing, they experienced radical displacement that affected each of them very deeply in different ways, despite their different ages and political positions and everything else. What I've identified here is just 4 of the ways that they express that displacement through that use of unnatural orthography, the superimposing of strata, the unstable subjectivity, and the refusing to name. And I think there are so many interesting overlaps and cognates in other literatures of trauma, including the film that we saw earlier, that I hope it generates some interesting thinking. in everybody today. So thank you very much.
So I guess you could see from Paul's presentation why students flock to his classes, standing room only. Our final speaker of this panel is Amy Sarah Carroll, who's already been introduced once today, and I don't want to repeat everything that was already said, so I'm going to say something a little different, which is that poet, writer, scholar, none of those words are quite accurate or not quite sufficient in describing what she does. There's a Korean word that encompasses all those things, which is escaping me at the moment. It's been driving me nuts. I've been trying to think of what it is for the last 30 minutes. But when it comes to my mind, Amy, I'm going to let you know what it is. As I was looking through Fanny and Freddie, one of your volumes of poetry in the broadest sense, the feeling I got was that it would be impossible to get through the book. And what I mean by that is that every page is so rich with the image, with the stricken text, that I couldn't get to the end of the page. I didn't want to turn the page because there was too much to learn from the page that I was currently on. So once I get a hold of my copy of the book, I'm going to take a long weekend and not do anything else but read Fanny and Freddie. So, Amy, and the reason why I'm looking like this is because there's light shining in my face. I can't see anybody in the audience, so I can't tell where anybody is. So, Amy, we're ready for you.
While we're getting the PowerPoint up, I'll just say I'm curious about the words, so when it comes to so let's see. I also just want to fix my PowerPoint so I know what I'm doing here. Hold on. Thank you. Okay, so clearly I need lots of tech support in both my presentations too. I also just want to thank all the organizers for this conference. I wish I could have been here yesterday. I was traveling elsewhere, and I'm really sorry I missed the presentations yesterday. And I want to thank Camilla and Marcy for inviting me to present at the conference, and I just want to thank my fellow panelists and Rigoberto, with whom I read in the morning, and you, the audience, who are taking time out of your busy schedules on a very sunny day to listen and engage with our presentations. So as I noted at the outset of my morning reading, I regard that presentation and what I'm going to present to you now, can you hear me? Is this good? Okay, good. As two pieces of a larger story, and together they speak to, and I try to tailor them to speak to and of my contributions to the collaborative artivist project, the Transborder Immigrant Tool. In the morning, I addressed the relationship between TBT and prior poetry I'd written. Now I'd like to sketch with really broad brushstrokes the relationship between TBT and a history of border art that I write about in my forthcoming scholarly monograph, Remax. I'll also touch upon the relationship between this archive and one of border writing more generally, what I'm going to refer to what I refer to in my presentation's updated title today as writing as replacement, with the italicization on place. And to clarify, when I italicize place embedded in replacement as a descriptor for a body of work, my own included, I seek to name work that reinscribes the particularities of site or place into ideological apparatuses which routinely convert locales into evacuated spaces of emergency or exception, of industrialization and militarization. So a return to place italicizes, and this might actually be an unnatural orthography, the stubborn differences that will not be homogenized. Inseparable from place is kith and kin. Before turning to the specificities of the greater Mexican context, I want to reiterate that I speak as one member of a collective, Electronic Disturbance Theater 2.0 Bang Lab, which also includes Ricardo Dominguez, Brett Stahlbaum, Misha Cardenas, and Ellie Merman. I also speak independently as a student of post-1960s living as form in and of the Americas. My double vantage point, with any luck, will help us to illuminate how and why the transborder immigrant tool cannot be separated from what the art historian Mari Carmen Ramirez cleverly puns the contextura of the project's development, histories, and future of art and design at the Mexico-US border with a lowercase b, and the border with an uppercase B of neoliberal globalization. This distinction I'm making between borders and the border with a capital B has to do with the other distinction I implicitly or explicitly alluded to when I referred on the one hand to place and practice and on the other to space and theory. The latter has dictated and continues to overdetermine late 20th century and early 21st century borderization, and more specifically in the Mexican-US context, the continent's NAFTAification. It cognitively maps international dividing lines, the ongoing militarization and industrialization of the border region, and the financialization of various national becoming transnational economies. It impacts how the human is defined, or more pointedly, who is accorded humanity. It also depends on and alters how art and literature, the work of knowledge production, and the geopolitics of the university, where we are now, are defined. On the latter point, we could continue to riff, I could continue to riff. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Mexico-US border in particular was deemed the purview of Latinx AO. There wasn't Latinx yet, but Latina, Latino O, and U.S. ethnic studies, while the border with a capital B figured as a central symbolic referent of post-colonial and global studies. And I just, in this schematization, no outside existed, but nonetheless, the perennial juxtaposition of borders, literal geographies, and the border with a capital B, a shifting imaginary geography, of capital, I might add, continues to be maintained in a feedback loop of the political and the aesthetic, as repetitive as media footage that recycles the image of border hopping undocumented entrants. So if you were to turn to Fox News, you'd probably see this recycling loop, right? Especially right now. So I wonder how far we could ask, how far must we rewind the clock to avoid a precedentist reading of contemporary border production, like the work of art collectives, like my own that I'm a part of, Cognate, or Post-Commodity, which was recently in the Whitney Biennial. In the last few years or so, in the last year or so, colleagues and acquaintances have commented to me that it's an exciting time to be working on or creating border art. I want to underscore that border issues are not simply intellectual or academic or artistic concerns for me and my collaborators. Border relations, border games, border dramas cannot be examined or constructed at some neutral, objective, or transparent remove. That said, the need to theorize the processes by which the tension between the Mexico-US border and the New World border with a capital B are maintained remains politically urgent. I also want to emphasize that with TBT, my collaborators and I entered the border, the US, the Mexican culture wars midstream, that beyond being members of a collective, we view our work as contributing to larger conversations that we did not start and which we will not finish. TBT has been focused on the California-Baja California corridor, a region generally regarded as the birthplace of border art. With the project, we cite and take solace from a growing repertoire of site-specific artivist practices originating in the same locale. As such, we heed and also reissue a call to action that actually echoes Antigone's that I used in the title of this presentation, will you share the labor, share the work, despite or perhaps even because of prior speculations in Latin American studies that there were no room for Antigones of the Americas? The art historian Joanne Berlowitz, the performance artist Guillermo Gomez Peña, the art curator, activist David Avilos, and the art historian Illa Shireen, among others, attribute one beginning for San Diego-Tijuana corridor border art to Chicano Park in San Diego's Barrio Logan. Now designated a National Historic Landmark, Chicano Park in 1970 was the site of struggle, a temporary autonomous zone for the enunciation of a community's political and aesthetic sovereignty. And maybe you're aware, but the battle was over pylons of a freeway that overshadowed the neighborhood, that unexpectedly became canvases of resistance, of hope and social revolution, reclaimed and remixed as murals after the construction of the freeway literally split the predominantly Latino community. And after the state then, community members occupied the park and painted murals, planted flowers, vegetables, and then that very space where the park was started was being designated for highway patrol, a station by the state of California. So it was an ongoing battle with the city for the community to actually be able to paint underneath the freeways. So I'm showing you some of these images. The struggle has continued, but updated murals, for instance, double Emiliano Zapata and Subcomandante Marcos of the Zapatistas. And I took this photo of one of my collaborators, Ricardo, in Chicano Park in summer 2005. I want to say that Chicano Park's murals follow and anticipate the transformation of Southern California into a zone of aerospace and technological industry, while also echoing Mexican muralism's twofold utopic and dystopic vision of modernization. To date, San Diego functions as a nexus. In the 1970s, it shared with Tijuana the world's busiest border crossing and most trafficked zone of undocumented crossings. It's long been a military outpost, just as Tijuana has been an undocumented cultural mecca, despite Mexico City describing its northern states as cultural wastelands. And it serves as a leading role in the racial scripting instantiated binationally, but racial scripting instantiated binationally, but uninationally legislated by the Mexican government. In 1965, Mexico established the Border Industrialization Program to reabsorb braceros, temporary workers that set the stage for the current U.S. dependence on Latin American labor and Latino labor. Roughly contemporaneous with the establishment of the Border Industrialization Program and the occupation and eventual legitimation of Chicano Park, from 1968 to 1973, the U.S. military spent about $1 billion a year on a new computer-powered initiative, first developed to end the war in Vietnam, Operation Igloo White. And despite being a really high-price technological failure for the U.S. military, Igloo White was the first real-time computer-driven surveillance program. With it, the U.S. military sought to build a virtual fence to guarantee another border, the dividing line between North and South Vietnam. In the process, military designers and strategists helped to invent the modern electronic battlefield and also to initiate and link the zone of the border to the development of surveillance technologies, because this was happening at UCSD. University of California, University of California, San Diego. This think tank that was the Jasons was part of ARPA, founded in 1960, which is now DARPA, which is part of the Defense Department's military development. It was named after Jason's in the Argonauts, and it was comprised of 45 scientists from America's top universities who would, mostly physicists, that would meet every 6 weeks in La Jolla, California, which is where UCSD is located. I'm trying to talk very quickly. I hope it's okay. Because I want to try to bring all this stuff together so you have a sense of where we were working. So the Jasons were actually developing different kinds of sensors. So these are some images of sensors that were, there were acoustic sensors, seismic sensors, metal detective sensors. These were all to be deployed in Vietnam. Radio frequency sensors that would eventually lead to some of the technologies that say we experience all the time when we do air travel. On the other side of the border, San Diego's Aerospace Museum, sited in the Spanish Revival style of Balboa Park, yet founded to recognize technological innovations, was reimagined in Tijuana. And this is actually an image of the Secut, the globe of the Secut, which is a cultural center in Tijuana that is actually this theater, and the center was designed to look like the Aerospace Museum, but this is an art museum. And cultural center. And it was inaugurated in 1982. To open Mexico explicitly for further space exploration by capital. This was the year that the peso crashed in Mexico. So if you can think this periodization, and there was this kind of what David Harvey describes as this exchange for the restructuring of debt, like massive opening of the Mexican market. And neoliberal, the first phase of Mexico's neoliberal transition. But I'm jumping ahead in this story. In La Jolla in the 1960s, I just also want to mention that UCSD's visual arts department was taking off. Leading performance and conceptual artists were being hired to shape the direction of the program. And contemporaneously, UCSD's literature department was going to offer sanctuary to intellectual radicals like Marcuse, his student Angela Davis, the science fiction writer Stanley Kim Robinson, the Marxist literary critic Fred Jameson. Here's the person that didn't get hired, Alan Capro, interviewing, this is an image by Alan Sekula, Alan Capro interviewing Ana Mendieta for a job in the visual arts department. She doesn't get the job. And we unfortunately know what happened after that. But border studies in the 1980s was being born and is usually understood as the initial result of research in the social science and in public policy. But I really want to stress that, of course, the arts were key to thinking the emergence of border studies as well. And that while South Texas was the subject of Gloria Anzaldua's game-changing Borderlands, La Frontera, for most, the ground zero of border cultural production was the Tijuana-San Diego corridor. And in this period, it was a ground zero for culture wars and all for a number of reasons, including its proximity not only to the border but Los Angeles, which was in the process of stealing postmodern art or postmodernism from New York, if New York stole it from Paris in Europe, as art history tells the tale. But postmodernisms here increasingly signaled postmodernisms inseparable from new North American configurations, reconfigurations of racialized, gendered, sexualized capitalism. In the arts in the San Diego corridor, there was work like this by the UCSD affiliates, Liz Cisco, Louis Hack, and David Avalos, who are testing the powers of the conceptual and the performative of socially engaged practice. This is 88 of what the Mexican novelist poet Cristina Rivera Garza terms disappropriation, and concrete poetry in works like Welcome to America's Greatest Tourist Plantation. that appeared on the rear exterior of 100 city buses in January 1988, the week before the city hosted its first Super Bowl. And the message was pretty bald-faced. The recalibration of U.S. disposable labor pools was inseparable from the reconfiguration of the Mexico-U.S. borderlands. Okay, in the late 1980s, border art was exploding, and powerful image poems like artist Richard Lou's quickly disappeared border door that was sited right on the border and was lined with keys and with the invitation for the undocumented to cross the Mexico-U.S. border with dignity. He was part of a group called the Border Art Workshop that's often credited with bringing to international attention the very concept and eventual category of border art. And of course, Gomez Peña's work, with which many of you are probably familiar. He was born in Mexico City, later became involved, moved to Southern California and became involved in the Border Art Workshop. He's frequently invoked in the same breath as Ansaldúa as a founding father of border cultural production. And when I spoke of the New World Border, this is of course a phrase of his. He was notably rethinking projects like NAFTA, proposing parallel projects. He called his own the North American Free Art Agreement in lieu of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So I just want to say again, this was a site of major battle. So when people say, where did your project come from? Why is it coming out of San Diego? And the Tijuana corridor. Here's another piece by the documentary photographer Fred Lanier, who also wanted to rename NAFTA. He wanted to call it not a fair trade, not a fair trade for all. But at the same time, again, I want to emphasize, I'm going to speed up because I want to get a little bit further. There was all kinds of technologies that were being tested to refortify the border in the 1990s, specifically in the San Diego-Tijuana corridor. And this coincided, I referenced this morning, but it coincided with two massive restructuring of Greater Mexico, and one was, as the political scientist Peter Andres details, the redirecting of the movement of Colombian drug routes that had been through the Caribbean and Florida, refunneling them through overland through Mexico. This was on the part of the DEA, and two, the U.S. government developing its infamous prevention through deterrence policy, which weaponized the Sonoran Desert and converting it into, in the words of Border Patrol officers, itself a Border Patrol agent. So this continues, and I'm going to skip forward, but it was in this ambience. The last slide was from Insight, which was a project that actually stretched over the NAFTA years, the complete implementation of NAFTA from '94 to 2008. It was a little bit after that we began to develop our project called the Transborder Immigrant Tool. Ricardo and Brett first started.
If you could just wrap up, sorry.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Oh, no. It's okay. Sure.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I think I have 2 minutes, is that right?
Yeah, your 2 minutes is great, yeah.
Because I have on here that.
I didn't mean stop now, sort of just wrap up.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to give this whole history because this is the history in which we began to develop our project. And in the last 2 minutes, I just want to say this is a project where we worked with NGOs in the borderlands in the spirit of previous border art, collaborating not only with each other, but with activists in the region. This is actual water caching that we were doing. This is the tool, its navigational face that is functional. And let me just skip forward. They're housed on repurposed Motorola phones, which are cheap and plentiful on eBay. And the actual JavaScript leads, when way stations are entered, can lead one to these water cache sites. The phones also contain 24 poems with information about desert survival, and that information that was culled from survival manuals, from military manuals, and from a handbook that was briefly distributed by the Mexican government, and from conversations with undocumented entrants themselves. I'm just going to show you, if it's okay. We can talk about this. It's 20 minutes now. This was the kind of coverage we got. Glenn Beck opened his brief Blaze site with coverage like explicit poetry, GPS phones help illegals. We were then put under investigation. And we can talk about that more. This was my response to Fox News when they wanted to interview us. Maybe I'll stop there.
I am Gabriel Bangboshi, and I will be the talkative for tonight. Well, that is ironic because I don't like to talk much. But anyway, I'm going to be talking tonight, and I'm going to be assisted poetically. I have a poeticative, and I'm the talkative. Right, so I want to take this time to introduce the poeticative for tonight, who is going to be the co-MC, Tato Magano. Please, could you please step forward? Tato is a writer, poet, essayist. His short stories appear in Queer Africa 2, New Fiction, and Long Live the Short Story. The short story is Dead, Volume 2. He is the co-curator of Public Action, a student activism resource informed by his active involvement in the Fear Must Fall movement in South Africa. His poem, How Dare You, features In Gentle Dust, a collaborative video installation project by several art practitioners between South Africa, UK, and the Netherlands that will be shown at the 10th Berlin Biennale in 2018, that is next year. He is the founding partner of Vanguard magazine, a multimedia black conscious, womanist and queer-centric platform for exploring the experiences of black young people in South Africa and the diaspora. He is a graduate student here at Rutgers in comparative literature like me. Please, a round of applause for Tato. All right. I have a short gift for you, and I'm just going to read that quickly before we move ahead. Take me to the heart of poetry. Let me see it. Let me feel the magnificence of its rhythm in the nerves of my soul. Let poetry stand before me. 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 Let poetry stand before me and play out its own body. Let poetry live. Let poetry live. Let poetry live. Let poetry live. Let poetry live and occupy our burdened bodies. Let poetry sing, let poetry hymn, let poetry dance, let poetry rise, let poetry fall, let poetry fall, let poetry fall, let poetry fall on the fiber of our skin. Let poetry unwind our whole. Let poetry save a soul today from its own doom. Let poetry kill. Let poetry kill. Let poetry kill. Let poetry kill the monster in us. Thank you. All right. Now, without wasting much time, I want to introduce the first group that will be performing today. You know, when I saw the name, I was like, hey, what's going to happen? I saw Rebel. rebel. And I saw mayhem, mayhem. And I felt, you know what? I have to wear 2 sweaters and a huge jacket because this place might, spark. So be prepared for the spark, the poetic spark. Anyway, now the group that is going to go first is the Verbal Mayhem Poetry Collective, a student organization at Rutgers University, New Brunswick here, that focuses on the expression of literary and performing arts, particularly that of poetry. For 10 years, Verbal Mayhem has continually recognized the necessity for writers of all styles to come together and has proved a venue for individuals to do so. This group meets every Wednesday, and I was there once. And to be honest, I got into the spirit of poetry. Now, jam your hands together as much as you can with all the energy in you as I call the Verbal Mayhem on stage. Verbal Mayhem. Now, you know what? When I call the people, you just say, verbal, verbal, verbal. Let's go. Hey, wait, hold it. Are we tired? Are we tired? Oh my God. Now let's make this clear. There's no rule today. We are in a space out of rule, out of the law. So don't expect any form of trigger warning. We want poetry to inhabit you. We want poetry to take you whole, right? So please, I want you to, you can do whatever you want. If anyone says anything that strikes a chord in you, you can shout, you can cry, you can laugh, you can say, hey, and just shout it out, okay? Right, so I want you to be alive and full of life tonight. So again, jam your hands together for Verbal Mayhem as they storm the stage.
Hello, my name is Gabby, or Gab. I'm losing my voice. I don't normally sound like I'm this, I guess. But my name is Gabby, and I'm the president of Verbal Mayhem. I organize the open mic portion for this part. I will be performing first, and then there will be a few others that I have brought along with me. Yes, so I will do a poem that I wrote about a month ago. This poem isn't necessarily in another language because I'm not really fluent in Spanish, but I know enough to understand and communicate with my family members. So I wrote this poem for my grandmother in response to Donald Trump's comments on the tragic hurricane in Puerto Rico a month ago. So here it is. An open letter to your president. I lounge on her living room sofa, hugging a mug with a smiling cookie near the handle. Café con leche before bed. Abuela reads a verse from La Biblia, and she speaks of her brother and the serpents in her cellar. Her home in El Campo Arecibo, she says between the shrieks of loud laughter. He defecated on her muñecas to protect her or to fool her. The intention does not make the cuento any more palatable. The two of us wipe hysterical tears from our eyes, and she goes on about her mother and father, Jibaros, wholesome, home. And nostalgia flows through her body with every sip of coffee. I can feel what he meant to her by the way her voice cracks. She still mourns him. She forgets our birthdays, our names. To her, I'm still 16 on that same sofa, but her home in Puerto Rico she can escape to. What you call broken is Abuela's foundation. She braided it into the hair of her children, served it on the plastic plates at Thanksgiving, sang it in the kitchen over a broom, manifested it, cultivated it, drank it in cups of coffee and bites of pan de ajo. You could never. And in the words of Beatriz González, soy boricua pa que tú lo sepa, y también vete pa'l carajo, sign the pissed off boricua. And that was a poem that I did, kind of spur of the moment. I wrote it in class. Yeah. It's very cold in here. Yeah. So I'm gonna bring up a friend of mine. Her name is Leslie Ann Contreras. She's the most beautiful human being I think I've ever encountered in my whole life. And y'all are gonna be able to meet her too, so give it up for Leslie, yay!
Hi, I'm Leslie Ann. I'm actually a work study at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. I've been there for 4 years. I kind of call myself a trash poet because I write stuff but it doesn't ever really make sense. But like Gabby asked me to perform tonight, so I wrote something in Spanish because like that was actually my first language, but I forgot a lot of it because I had to learn English to go to school, and like, you know, me and my siblings would always be speaking English in front of my mom, I'm first generation, she was immigrant, so she would always be like, what are you guys saying? Like, I don't understand what you guys are saying. So it kind of like developed in us like having Spanglish almost. So every time I talk to my mom, it's like we go from English to Spanish so fast because I don't know all the words in Spanish. She doesn't know all the words that I'm talking about in English, so we just go back and forth, and I just always thought that was so beautiful. Just because like we had to meet at two different worlds almost, you know? But yeah. Here goes. Lenguaje hecho de lenguas de los colonizadores, desde pequeña hablando español, forzada de cambiar de lenguas desde español a inglés, hablando tanto inglés que casi se me olvida mi lenguaje nativo, muchas veces olvidando palabras necesarias para comunicarme con mi criadora, mi madre, la mujer que me ha dado todo en mi vida. ¿Cómo es que se me ha olvidado mi lenguaje nativo? No sé dónde poner los tildes ni cómo se escribe una pregunta, muchas veces diciendo cómo se dice con una palabra en inglés. No sé cómo pasó esto, pero no voy a dejar que se me olvide de dónde vengo, mi isla bella. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Leslie. So next up, we're gonna have Jose. So give it up for Jose.
So I was just told about this about 2 hours ago. And I had no idea what I was gonna perform. They asked me to perform one of my poems that I usually perform in Spanish, and it's kind of hard. And when I was trying to pick something, I realized I have something to say that I never really said because it's very difficult for me to talk about. So like Leslie, I'm first generation, and my parents are immigrants. So this is the poem. It has no title. My first memory as a child, I remember my mom saying, "Hijo, ¿me puedes ayudar con esto?" And I remember hearing Grandma, "Güerito, ven pa' aquí." That means little white boy. And I'm the only one in my family who technically has the whitest skin. My mother has this beautiful caramel skin tone, and my brother has this beautiful darker caramel skin tone, and so does everyone else in my family. So I never found it weird when they called me Güerito. I remember when I was 8 years old, we took a Christmas picture, and I looked at the picture and everyone laughed, and I was wondering why, and he said, "You are the whitest person in this family." I didn't see anything wrong with it. My mother said, "You're beautiful and you're unique." I asked her, "Why am I not like you? Why am I lighter than everybody in the family?" She said, "Don't question God, just love it." When I was 16, me and my cousin Yetzi and Julio, we got pulled over by a cop. It was 2 in the morning and he asked for our names. He looked at me, he asked me what my name was. I told him my name is Jose. He looked at me and then flinched again. He was curious to know why a white man had a Spanish man's name. He looked at my friend Julio and he said, "What's your name, son?" He said, "My name is Julio Juarez." He looked at him with disbelief and anger and said, "Julio, do you have papers?" It confused me. Why would he want to question somebody if he has papers or not based on his name? The funny thing is, Julio actually had documentation. He was actually born here in New Brunswick. He asked my cousin Yetzi, "What's your name, son?" He said, "Yetzi Rodriguez." He gave him the same look. The next day, I was questioning why he didn't give me that look. I was wondering why he didn't look at me the way he looked at them. I started realizing at that age, it's because of my skin tone, I guess I'm privileged. And I'll be honest, I never got along with anybody that was Mexican. Because everyone looked at me was, "You're white." I never really got along with white people because they said, "You're Mexican." At a young age, in ESL, I forced myself to learn English because I believed it was wrong for me to have white skin and be Hispanic. I remember one day my mother asked me, why don't you ever want to show people that you're Mexican? I didn't know how to answer that. I guess I was afraid to either be known as Mexican and have white skin or have white skin and be known as Mexican. I didn't know which one was worse. I'm 22 years old. I look back at everything and I realize I have nothing to be ashamed of. My mother has beautiful dark skin. I have beautiful white skin. That doesn't define me. And I realized that doesn't define anybody. Your skin tone does not define you. My mother once asked me, why are all your friends black and Indian? I said, the same reason you're black and I'm white. It has no meaning. The personalities mean everything. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we had all the Latino poets. So we're gonna have a Filipino poet come up. Ray, can you please come up to the stage and spice it up for us? Thank you.
So before I share my poem, actually I want to share a song that comes from my hometown in the Philippines where I was born. And my town is called Ciudad de Zamboanga. And it's coined as Asia's Latin city because this particular area in the Philippines speaks this dialect in the Philippines called Chavacano, which is like a Spanish Creole bastardized, language. And that's the language that my parents speak, and that's something that I can understand. And it's hard to preserve that kind of language, so I just started learning Spanish. So that's as close as it can get, which is really weird. So I'll share a little bit of the lyrics just because it's a way for me to preserve something that I was born with that is also fading away because of globalization and English imperialism. American imperialism. I'm not gonna sing it. I can sing it, but not today. El lenguaje de Zamboanga chavacano. El chavacano un poquito español. Si ta conversa chavacano na pueblo, dao taya tuna México. El chavacano un poquito español. Qué bonito allí, qué bonito allí. Si ta conversa chavacano na Puebla, da otaya tu na México, el chavacano un poquito español. So that's a song that my dad sings to me growing up, but now he doesn't because I'm not a baby anymore. And another quick poem that I have, it's called A Gathering Place, Motherland, Part 1. And there's one phrase in Tagalog, and it's tunay na mahal. Tunay na mahal means true love, and then everything else is in English. Okay. Napping lightly and waking up to a lyrical loop, reminding me what I'm looking for. Oh, by the way, the background is that I was in a bus towards my ancestral home, from Manila, the city, to my ancestral home, and I was in this bus, and I was by myself. That's just the background. I have 4% left. Okay, I'll start again. Napping lightly and waking up to a lyrical loop, reminding me what I'm looking for. Tunay na mahal, tunay na mahal, tunay na mahal. A 3 a.m. alarm that I'm near my father's ancestral land of milkfish, rice fields, and mango groves. I've been on this bus since 11, to home, to family, to love. As I finish this poem, I've arrived at the terminal. Welcome to Dagupan, a gathering place.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for that, Ray. So my group of people that I was responsible for bringing actually played me tonight and canceled on me. But I had a few loyal people that still came and others that just came on a whim, like Jose. But if anybody else, I encourage anybody else who's in the audience that writes poetry and has something, if you want to perform, on behalf of Verbal Mayhem, you are sponsored by us now. I will. What is that? What's the when you do the sword? No, knight, I guess, but that sounds weird. All right, so nobody? Oh yeah. Sure. Okay.
Well, I have to stand here, and I thought, well. In the spirit of breaking down things, I'm going to read. It's longish, but I think it's quite appropriate in what we're talking about. Earlier this year, I was in the UK in a 2-week residency. In the Netherlands on a 2-week residency, on an art residency, and the Rijksmuseum had an exhibition celebrating 400 years of the Dutch relationship with South Africa, called The Good Hope. The group of people that I was with attempted to do an intervention at this exhibition, which didn't go anywhere. And so out of frustration, I sat at the entrance after our meeting and started writing. And so what I'm going to read here is accepted from a longer poem, which is published in Contemporary End. So if you want to go find it, the title of it is History as Fetish, Culture as Commodity. Like wrecking balls we went wanting to make you see, to tell the truth with a small t, to realize that the story was murkier than the one history books narrate, that history, with a small h, is lived in the present, ever present, wanting you to want to change and tell a new one story, to tell the truth with a small t. Like wrecking balls we went, but you could only show us exhibits. Exhibition, like exhibits. Witnesses of the past, you say, the Rijks, a court of law. Presenting but 60 witnesses from 300 to make the case for the innocence of empire. The jury of peers made up of the unknowing, uneducated, you say. The enterprising nature of fraught negotiations, the unequal agency of bartered trade, the empathetic relationship of exploitation, severing the plundering umbilical endured for centuries. Your legitimacy, bought by decrying the apartheid you blueprinted. Good hopes blind in their continued imperialism, uncompromising, refusing. We, those demanding nuance, compromise. We are caught in the impasse of desire and desires, desiring full representation, full participation, but knowing that our participation is the antithesis to the civilized, normative version of history empire desires not to complicate with a capital C. Because all is well that ends well. The fervor of good hope assailing as it demands because there were a few bloody years in between. Clapping and chanting gullible hope while history with a capital H reconstructs narratives and makes our past equal with a capital E relationship. We, us, the stupid, as Ether loves. Ether Kit's laughter reverberating, assaulting as I write, the masochism of the decolonial, the desire to undo the Rijks across the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, the wicked laughter of colonial assurance, of supremacy, the fever of the archive, the fetish of the determining with a capital D, the commodity of cultural imperialism. But the game is up, I realize. I laugh, like Eartha Kitt, with relish, at the insolence of empire. I wickedly salivate the terror of imperialism and its disgusting recalibration of history. I pity its insistence that I fall in love with its brutality with a capital B, masked in exhibitions with a capital E. I fetishize in fetishized self-serving shock and commodities of existence in the impending dawn of hypercapitalism, at its infantile tactics to perpetuate its glorious past with a capital P. To think of doing the right thing as a way to shake off the feelings of colonial guilt. The narcissism of the Rijksmuseum to only now start dealing with Holland's colonial relationship with South Africa. The story the Dutch have to tell themselves about Jan van Riebeck's discovery, read exploit, of South Africa. The refusal to compromise because the truth can only make shame an unlivable lived reality. The arrogant laughter caught intense emotions of distortion. I laugh wickedly, like Ether, at the anxiety of empire. I laugh in uncompromise, in refusal, in making anxious, in unsettling empire and its history, in seeing it running scared, ashamed at its nakedness. I laugh in the refusal to love this narration of empire. I relish the fever of disruption, the gullible refusal of those whose histories haunt empire's worlds. They make my belly swell with ignominy at these anxieties. They sing, howl, and scream every day with pointed fingers at this good hope. They make restless these faces that know to make smiles when they walk past you, seeing your ancestors in you. Their teeth riddled with stains of lives lived and lost to their colonial service, their imperial present, the Rijks of the nation. And so empire, the Rijks continues, declaring, it wasn't us with a capital US. Not us, not we, not now, continuing to make itself they. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe we can do better. That verbal mayhem, always on fire. And that is titled My Poeticative. Okay, we are still in this business. You know, something happened yesterday, not after the rain anyway. Yeah, that's the title of my work. I love rain, I love water. You always find water everywhere I am. I don't know why. But I want to read a poem which comes from my discovery. I say that word with hesitance because I know the kind of work that has been done with discovery. But the kind of discovery I'm talking about here is the first time I became aware that Augustino Neto's wife is actually a poet. How many of you know that? Eugenia Neto, she's a poet. Nobody hears about her. And I read her in Portuguese. Forgive me, my Portuguese is really bad. But I struggle to read her in Portuguese. And actually, this poem it developed from anxiety to want to translate her and the limit of my language through which I assess the poem, which is not translated. I am tying this to what happened yesterday because the slam by Janelle was so great, and I was like, I wish I could hear everything he was saying. But I let the sound get into me, which I believe is going to happen to everyone today. So I want to read this poem, which I titled Neto's Mother. And I /M, capital M / capital O. We know what that means, right? Neto's Mother. I'm going to read Portuguese, but forgive me if it sounds really bad. Raio de luz, trovão, ser sempre luz. Ray of light, thunder, being always light. That's my own translation. By Eugenia Neto. I actually took that from a poem. I wish I could translate you, Eugenia. I wish I could reimagine your word of water, your image of fire, your sound of hair, your sense of health, Pombas. What happened to those doves when they abandoned their homes little by little? What garment of grief in the high waters of nostalgia overshadowed the fleet? What fleet in a daydream? What flight in the unreal? Cantu au labatado. What lessons of grief did that drawling September teach you of home? What promise did it hold? What quest for restoration? What song of hope that will never die? Poema de amor. Whose voice can sing the song of love as yours? What song pronouncing the victory of love spun from the web of hoary history? What song invoking the land, speaking supplications in multiple voices? Ser mio amor. What is this love whose infinite depth, sublimity, grace, power leaves the light of thunder on the wings of water, on the lap of land, in the burst of being, in the awakened longings and nightmares of times and homes? I wish I could translate you, Ruhinia. I wish I could enter proper into the prodigious art of your water world and fire image and hair sound and earth sense. Thank you. Now that's a preparation for what is going to happen next. The fire. The fire. Now I have this very important quote from the next artist that is coming up. We experienced him yesterday. It was, whoo. I admire his memory. I felt like, oh my God, I'm in another space. It changed the space we inhabited yesterday. I felt like, oh my God, a griot is here. I appreciate the work of memory. I wish I could do that. So this quote is from Janelle. I'm sorry, this biography is in French, but I'm too afraid because we have so many professional French speakers here. I don't want to get spanked. So I'm going to read the bio in English. I'm sorry. So this quote is from Janelle. My uncle's name is John. He always thought that one day I will take him to heaven. He tells me that I am his wings. My friends nicknamed me Janelle. So the actual name of Janelle is Amani Kasson. He referred to himself as the little Nigerian from Niger, who has this strong interest. I'm sorry, I'm translating the French. So it's a process of translation, so I may be, scrambling. Yes. Who has this interest in artistic career, a son of Imam established in Ivory Coast. Janelle had to face very early the misunderstanding of his family because music and art is not something that is considered to be a career. But nothing can stop this passion of this San Pedro's boy. He's so much invested in Bob Marley. We all know Bob Marley, right? Yes, he's invested and is influenced by Bob Marley's music. And of course, every time he sings with his friend on the streets, on the beach, and at the end of the day, even with the crisis with family, he marries his music. That's a very strong metaphor. And in 1998, Janelle composed Religious Affairs with his friends, musician friends, a song inspired by the role of mistrust between the Christian and Muslim communities in Côte d'Ivoire. And the title itself is a first sign of commitment to dialogue and peace. And since then, Janelle has been involved in so many musical performances and production. And from 2003, he participated in 2 concerts at the Training and Promotional Center, Taya Naime, CFPM in April and May 2003. And of course, he also performed at the military pool on the evening of December 31st of that same year. So we've experienced Jonelle yesterday, and I have the honor to introduce and rebring Jonelle to storm the stage. Please, a round of applause for Jonelle from Niger. Thank you. Can we go by Jonelle? Jonelle, Jonelle.
Sous ce ciel bleu, c'est souvent des rires et souvent des pleurs. Chez les hommes comme chez les femmes, chez les riches comme chez les pauvres. Mais essuyez vos larmes et cessez de pleurer, mangez ce que vous avez et dansez comme vous voulez. Sous ce ciel bleu, souvent on a l'impression qu'on est ensemble et on s'aime ça. Et qu'on sourit souvent.
Centaines ont témoigné pour Maïsoma parce qu'il se peut pour les cadavres. Tromper des milliers de personnes pour l'or et l'uranium, investir des millions pour renforcer les rébellions. Il y en a qui ont tiré sur des monts, mais pour diamant et pour coton, à qui fait confiance? À ces gens arrogants qui repoussent les mendiants ou ces gens inconscients appelés présidents ou ces gens qui, malgré nos pleurs et nos larmes, se contentent de voler l'argent. Sous ce ciel, quand on perd espoir, on perd tout en temps. Alors essuyez vos larmes et cessez de pleurer, mangez ce que vous avez et dansez comme vous voulez. Alors, bienvenue, Monsieur Jean-Bailou, dans notre palais. Comme il est écrit devant notre porte, notre mission est d'enrichir les riches et appauvrir les pauvres. Parce que de toute façon, ils le sont. On ne peut en aucun cas permettre à un pauvre de connaître mieux que son destin pauvre, parce que de toute façon, ils le sont. À la différence de nous autres, leur vie n'est que misère, souffrance et maladie. Pour cela, M. Djambaïdou, on a besoin de tes mains et des oreilles au service de notre système. On exige que tu côtoies ces pauvres malgré leur manque d'hygiène. Prends ta main s'il le faut dans leur plat moment, soutirons les meilleurs. Puisque notre but est de la maintenir dans une vie sans espoir, du père au fils, de la mère à la fille, dans un perpétuel combat sans fin contre la faim, on aimerait les voir cohabiter avec l'inquiétude et l'incertitude jusqu'à ce qu'ils se rendent dans un compte. Ils sont obligés d'endurer comme les aînés, partout. Ils disent que nous avions restauré l'inégalité, l'injustice et la corruption. Et ils n'ont encore rien vu. Bientôt, le mot confiance ne sera plus partout de leur langage. Le rire et la beauté, ils ne le verront que sur nos visages. Tout moyen d'expression, art, médias et presse écrite ne sera plus que souvenir, parce que de toute façon, ils ne sont plus. Les jeunes, en plus de la peur que nous avions restaurée dans leur cœur, comme des âmes supporteront le poids de notre système. Nous allons les tromper dans la mer de la pauvreté pure et dure. Ils sentiront l'odeur du désespoir sans espoir. Malgré leur diplôme, ils n'expérimenteront jamais le choix. Ils se laisseront corrompre sous prétexte que la vie est dure. Ainsi, ils serviront des pions sous nos échiquiers pour faire le choix de partir comme les aînés et périr. Parce que de toute façon, ils ne sont plus. Non, M. Jean-Marie, là-bas, ces pauvres ne se révolteront jamais parce qu'ils ne savent pas quoi répondre. Les districts lunaires de ce pays n'est pas une préoccupation première. Qu'ils soient dominés, écartés ou marginalisés, ils n'exprimeront jamais leur déception. M. Gabriel, pour se révolter, il faut s'unir. Mais ces pauvres, ils sont éparpillés, dépassés par leurs problèmes de survie. La seule occasion de se rencontrer, c'est les panades des choses, les mariages pour santé. Et même quand ils se révolteront, M. Djambaïdou, ils se tromperont de vue parce qu'ils n'ont pas une vision profonde. Bien qu'ils aient un destin vraiment pitoyable, ils s'apprendront à leur semblable parce que de toute façon, ils ne sont plus. Une dernière chose, M. Djambaïdou, pour maintenir un pauvre dans sa pauvreté, montre-lui les chemins des croyances. Ainsi, il verra tout malheur et même son manque de volonté, il le verra comme émanant de la volonté supérieure. En attendant la miséricorde, il faut l'État, la misère, sans jamais se prendre à la mort. Elle a des qualités provoquant des tendances diplomates, elle se parle toutes les langues. À cause d'elle, des âmes survivent et guérissent, des âmes survivent la cachette de face. Des hommes s'arment et s'habillent, crimes et conflits se multiplient, vols et viols dans la vue sur terre. Pourtant, elle n'est pas frôlante, mais elle est exigeante. Elle ne s'engage pas, elle pleure. Et l'amour en version audio du genre, ou la version vidéo à la Juliette et Roméo n'est pas sortie. Certains pensent, c'est parce qu'elle a du charme que le monde tourne autour d'elle, et d'autres pensent que c'est parce que le monde tourne autour d'elle qu'elle a du charme. Elle n'est pas collante, mais elle est exigeante. Elle ne s'engage pas, elle pleure. Et l'amour en version audio du genre ton pied, mon pied, ou la version vidéo à la Juliette et Roméo n'est pas son truc. Certains pensent, quand la donne change, elle nous abandonne et nous appauvrisse. Mais d'autres pensent que quand la donne change, c'est un défaut et qui entend son au revoir et à haute voix qui dira à mon revoir. Elle est l'amour. Sunana Mamoudou Shekarao Dom Awa. Les amis m'appellent le réveil. Et comme chaque chose a une fin, alors j'espère à la nigérienne qu'un jour les choses vont changer. Et que j'aurai la chance à mes côtés pour réaliser des rêves les plus fous que plus personne ne peut imaginer. Avoir les poches pleines d'argent, aider ma famille, me faire des amis et voyager à travers le monde. Trouver mon âme sœur au fond des grands montiers, prendre sa main et marcher avec elle sur les dunes perlées d'or, de chloé et de diamants. Sunana, Mamoudou Shekarao Dom Awa. La vie actuelle m'a abattu corps, âme et esprit jusqu'aux orteils, comme un rescapé sorti des décombres sismiques. Je sais continuellement et nigériennement vivre, comme un orphelin de père et de mère, choqué par les cris et les pleurs de ses frères et sœurs tués par des leurs. J'ai un cœur blessé, mais ça c'est dû à cette fille que j'ai tant aimée et qui m'a laissé tomber comme un petit bien, mâché et craché. La solitude est en train de me ronger à petit feu, comme un enfant abandonné par sa maman, condamné à vivre seul dans la rue face à son destin. La patience m'a fait blanchir les cheveux et l'enfance m'a rien apporté. Jusqu'au jour d'aujourd'hui, je vis comme dans une sorte de labyrinthe de Gamadou, Baladou. Et la même chose se répète dans ma vie sous forme de galère complétée dans ma tête. Le temps s'est arrêté comme un détenu derrière des filles. Et dans ma société, je me sens comme un poisson dans un. J'ai réalisé depuis hier le vide énorme qui est entre mon rêve et ma réalité. Et je m'étais demandé où toutes ces années sont passées, qu'ai-je j'ai gagné, avant qu'ai-je pu réaliser. Et bizarrement, je m'étais égaré dans mes propres pensées comme un marcheur sur les bords de l'Himalaya, perdu entre montagnes et rochers. La vie actuelle ne m'a jamais fait de cadeau. Et comme un clin d'œil, j'ai vu mes entreprises tomber dans l'eau. Elle a été toujours injuste envers moi, cette vie. Et ça, pour ne pas dépasser la juste mesure. Sinon, je dirais peut-être que le bon Dieu lui-même, il m'a oublié. Je ne suis pas embarrassé, encore moins un dormeur. Et j'ai consacré mes dates à courir gauche-droite, sans jamais m'arrêter, comme une gazelle qui se fait pourchasser par un lion affamé. J'ai travaillé 2 fois, 3 fois, 4 fois, 5 fois, 6 fois, plus que ceux-là qui encaissent mieux que moi. 2 fois, 3 fois, 4 fois, 5 fois, plus que ceux-là qui encaissent mieux que moi. Sunana, Mamoudou Shekarao Dom Awa. Un petit tour en... Neyemuso chamaye segevara, kadouye Guinée nyachibona, kadouye Mali segevara, kadouye Que la presse, les médias, publient ses lèvres dans leur couleur, avec chaque homme et chacune son monde, comme chien. J'ai vu des femmes courir vers le sud, j'ai aussi vu des femmes battre. J'ai vu des femmes qui ont de larmes aux yeux, j'ai aussi vu des femmes qui sont au fond. J'ai vu des jeunes filles se prostituer pour avoir du quoi manger. J'ai aussi vu des parents qui ont J'ai vu au Mali des femmes cadeaux pousser leurs filles vers la capitale Bamako, aller travailler dans des maisons comme des bonnes et envoyer de l'argent au village pour son Gabon. J'ai vu la peau noire et précisément à son pied. J'ai entendu de mes oreilles une femme dire à sa fille: Hé, pourquoi papa, donne-moi, maman, donne-moi la journée, on est plus comme ça. Et aujourd'hui, t'as 18 ans, alors écoute-moi. J'ai vu des femmes ghanéennes et des femmes nigérianes vers le désert du Kawa. Leur seul objectif, c'est l'Occident, et leur seule profession, c'est l'éducation. Ils sont sacrifiés sur les corps questions. J'ai vu comment ça se passe dans le monde. J'ai vu comment ça se passe à Niamey. J'ai entendu de mes oreilles une femme dire à sa fille: Allez, nous mourir, c'est un famille bon, plutôt que de c'est tout. J'ai aussi vu comment ça se passe dans le sud, là où la femme est dans la case pour qu'elle ait de quoi manger, obligée de prendre des galettes. Kadouye bile nyajibona, kadouye mali segefara, kadouye Niger Colombada de l'an, milieu muso Jamaïque segefara, kadouye bile nyajibona, kadouye mali segefara, kadouye Niger Colombada de l'an. Que la presse des médias publie ses lettres, chaton, la femme publie voix sur
Thank you again for making me relive the, poetic experience that I struggle to translate. Thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for Janelle again. Okay, now I'm going to call on my poeticative to come, poetically introduce us to the next performers, and it's going to be, I hope. Thank you. Tato. And I should announce we have this, I'm sorry, my English is fading. What is this? Buttons. Thank you. Yeah, because I'm thinking in Yoruba as well, so I don't know which one to, And I'm trying to think in French, which is pretty difficult. Anyway, so we have many of these buttons. Please, I'm going to just pass the bag around. It's going to be a poetic bag. So take any one you want and pass it to your neighbor. Yeah, we use the term neighbor. It's Nigerian English. If they say face your neighbor is the person sitting beside you. Right. Yes. Thank you, Tato.
I'm going to take a liberty. I hope you'll forgive me, Gabriel. I want to read it's long, but I think at least my body feels like this is what it wants to read. I wrote this poem in December of 2016. A young black lesbian woman was killed in South Africa in a very brutal fashion. Her name is Noluvo Solindayo. For a number of weeks, I couldn't make sense of the manner in which she was killed. And part of why I was struggling so much was that these killings are so common in South Africa. and in other parts of the world, but at least that was my most present experience. And so for weeks and weeks I was struggling, and so this is what then came after the struggle. It is called Who Will Bury You? Who will bury you? My mother sometimes asks. Who will bury you, Wanaka? Who will bury you, she asks, my mother, with a sting of contempt and disapproval and longing. Yes, longing, I think. Longing for the buriable child she birthed. When she asks, who will bury you? Her eyes looking beyond the child in front of her, their corneas glinting with the sadness of unmet expectations, grandchildren, lobola negotiations, and white flags at the gate, her desires, my suffocation. Who will bury you, she sometimes asks, with a voice defeated, her ears victim to too many jokes about me, her mouth tired from mourning in good faith. Don't you want to try a dress at least once, my child? I look at her sometimes. Who will bury you, Wanaka? Her words, the angst to my discontent. My eyes marveling at the ignorance of her demands, misting at her bequest of my sacrifice. At times I want to answer her. Often I want to say, Abutu wahahu, mama. Yes, my uncle, who taught me how to make the thing between my legs stand up, who taught me the warmth of a tongue, and that tears and that ears can hold soft tales about day-long longings and secrets, sweet secrets so special they shouldn't be repeated to cousins. Yes, my uncle, he will bury me. I want to say to her as I imagine her pupils growing at my nerve, betraying the known secrets that always find life in silences. He has to bury me as contrition, cleansing for that afternoon he almost set me alight, as remorse for hurling paraffin at my naked body when he found me and Jabu behind the toilet after school that day. His eyes witness to the heat he now missed, coercion and grooming unemployable to allow his partaking. He will bury me, as penance for awakening my urges and lust when Dragon Ball Z and the Powerpuff Girls should have been my fascinations. Supplication for the stone he threw that night after me and Lindwe were seen kissing. Asking for forgiveness that he dared care more about what people will say. He will bury me for all these reasons, I want to say. If only to redeem himself for the smoothness with which my name glides off his tongue when he's feeling proud, now that his family name is regular fodder for Sunday papers and political analysts. For all the trips he's declared, he's gone overseas again. Otsamaya mafatshe banna ngwana o wa rona. Rona ba bangwe re itse go tsala. While the thing between his legs throbs at the memory of his hands over my mouth. But I only look at my mother, at the sing-song of her eyes as they search for something in me to acquiesce to her, an acceptance of the shame I bring her virtue, a recognition of the many nights unslept, worrying for my safety, on bended knee and candlelight soliciting for my providence, asking the heavens what it was so terrible that she'd done not to deserve the envy of other mothers at her son's expanding family, the oohs and ahs of neighbors as the toddler-filled M-class makes itself known at the gate, her daughter's durable marriage, figurines of enduring stability, true to the set atop the red velvet caramel and vanilla tiered cake served at the wedding, and the fruitcake moon in the freezer only to be cut at their 10-year anniversary. Shaming all these modern fatten sets and divorce-ready reconciliations. Giving her conceit aplomb to walk past those churchwomen with their nostrils flung high, than the remorseful, terse hellos they now exchange in silence when they see her approaching. Only my eyes know just to stare at my mother. My low-waist skinny jeans, crop top and neck choker made tighter by my overgrown Adam's apple. The fierceness of their combination shrinking at her question. My sculpted torso not deserving masculine veneration. Nomonda sitting next to me, feeding our little Amahle as she makes baby sounds with her food. Both of us wearing summer dresses, and not enough petition for womanly habit. Who will bury you? Who will bury you? Who will bury you? An earworm assailing me as I stand at the sink, shifting from one ear to the other, streaming from the faucet as the sink fills with water, goring memories of Rakhadi as she held me in for an eternity, while they prayed the demon away, summoning the powers of the source of life to make haste appear Umkwenyana for their white wedding. She will bury me, I want to say. She will oversee the vigil, and the big pots for her silence when she saw my bruised face that afternoon, for her scorn when I held hands with Sipiwo, for her ingenuity with the venomous men across the street when I walked home from school. She will find the men to carry my coffin and dig my grave, the very men she loved with at me as they egged me for wearing a turban. They will wait for my coffin to lower and fill the grave the same way they walked behind me in the night, violated me with their fists and bottles, and covered me with their semen, then with street rubbish, and spat on me with all the vigor their torsos, their throats could master. She will organize all of this, I want to say. And sometimes when my mother asks, who will bury you, Wanaka? I hear the searing of her resolution, the centuries of lonely toil, walking alone because people keep saying, I see the pit of her loneliness at her people. I see the pit of her hopelessness at her people. Her eyes an assurance that home is whatever you want to be, Wanaka. Her hand warming the side of my face. When she asks, who will bury you, Wanaka? Her hand tenderly stroking my wrist. I want to tell her of the army of lover, sister, brother, friend, villagers that will come to cook the big pots, who will remind her that hulukile, hulukile at afternoon prayers, the radical woman who will carry my coffin and dig the grave 8 feet deep to make the heavens cry, just for just. I want to tell her of the magic, weaving, gender-bending, noir sculptures that will fill my grave and twerk to Beyonce's End of Time as my coffin descends. And raise in the ground red, remembering that I was here in the clearest soprano and tenor alto, and wash the dishes all the while, holding the sanctum of my life in these simple tasks, in their laughter as it fills her yard. They will command Malume to perform the customary rituals, demonstrating to him our queer libations to the ancestors, overseeing Rakhadi with the key to the food, making them both worthy of their titles. This army, these villagers, they will sing and sing and sing to soothe your loss. They will come for weeks and months after and years after, just for tea, for a smile, to bring a Christmas gift, or to take flowers to the cemetery. I want to say to her, these are the people who will bury me, Mama. They will hold Amanda's hand and walk her to place her wreath on my grave, and give Soli the dignity my uncle would deny him to mourn me publicly with our family. But I know my mother. It would be too much for her. I know how she loves her people, how she's trained in their traditions. And so we sit and wash the dishes and look at each other in the silence of her question, who will bury you, Wanaka? While my father's silence, in its loudness, remains the antiseptic filling the room with irresolvable thickness. Thank you.
Whew. That was deep. Okay, thank you for that. Now we want to have the last, but not the least, because the poetry continues afterward. You know, poetry is everywhere. All you have to do is listen. Now I adopted that and I adapted that, so don't quote me. Okay, now we're going to have the group Rebel Diaz, a group fronted. Yeah, please do it. Good. After all, you can see the writing on the wall. Rebel Diaz, resist, fight back. No human being is illegal. People, power. And what is that my sight cannot catch? Rebel. Right? I'm sorry, even with my glasses I can't see. That's too bad. Okay, fronted by MC Rodstars and MC and producer G1, Rebel Diaz shows us the true global power of hip-hop. After first performing at an immigrant rights march in New York City in 2006 in front of a $500,000 people, the bilingual crew has taken the international community by storm with their explosive live shows. With influences ranging from Chicago house of South American folk, Rebel Diaz combines classic boom bap tradition with hip-hop's global impact. The group's versatility has allowed them to share the stage with the likes of Common and Public Enemy while feeling right at home with acts like Rage Against the Machine and Call 13. Multiple tours throughout Europe and Latin America have only solidified their international appeal. Please jam your hands together as I call on Rebel Diaz to storm the stage. Thank you.
What we're gonna do right here is go back.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Yes.
What's up, beautiful people? How y'all feeling? Good? Yeah?
What up?
If y'all feel good, put one hand in the air like this, one hand in the air. And when the beat drop, ride with me real quick. Even if you sit down. Come on. Okay. Yeah, I see y'all, beautiful people. All right. And we're gonna need y'all help. How y'all help us out? It's gonna go like this. Yo. Let me hear y'all say, stop the war.
Stop the war.
Okay, let's get free.
Let's get free.
Say it, stop the war.
Stop the war.
Okay, let's get free. Pa'lante del combate, más que un elefante. Don't step back,
G1 dice lo que hace.
Be about it,
Ideas into action.
move past the planet.
It's time to save the planet.
Where you standing?
Which way is you going?
Which side
Is you supporting?
They build walls,
We show love.
they honor the dollar. I'm like,
Peace to the gods.
toast to the spirit, live life so I feel it. Not stuck or in prison
On
on
the move like in Philly.
march in the city.
My people walk with me. Hands in the air.
Life is worth living.
Motivate, move.
What's your motivation?
Motivate,
Yeah,
move.
what's your motivation?
Motivate,
Come on,
move.
what's your motivation?
Motivate, move.
What's your motivation?
I'm inspired by a letter I got from Miss Stewart. I just read it twice, so I know that I'm sure. Know it in my heart that the system is abusive. I also know a movement is more than music. If you can organize 5 people on your block, you should reassess before you bust typical shots. I know it's nice to roll it up and not do much, but conditions getting worse, so I feel we in a rush. You know karate?
Say it.
Do you know how to farm? You wake up with the sun, but with an alarm. If your leadership's lethargic and your gaze a moving target, all you gon' do is cast the stupid old charges. Yet if the leadership is militant and ready, prepare for Armageddon for the rich and the greedy. Let's see the proletariat at the front of the line. If you ignore my society, motivate, move.
What's your motivation?
Motivate, move.
What's your motivation?
Motivate, move.
What's your motivation?
Motivate, move.
We gonna do that now one more time. Yo.
We say people, y'all say power. People, we say we want, y'all say freedom. We want freedom.
Good evening. How y'all feeling? Yeah? That's what's up. Yo, big ups and much love and respect to the poets that came up here and shared their soul and shared their spirit with all of us, even to the brother that was speaking in French I couldn't understand, but I felt you. I felt you, G. So, yo, we Rebel Diaz. I like to talk without the mic here. Yo, when we talk about people power, what we're really talking about is that too often in our community, when we have problems, we feel that we can solve the issues in our communities by going to the Republicans and say, please, Mr. Republican politician, can you help us?
Please.
They'd be like, hell no. And then it'll be like, all right, well, let's try this side. And you say, please, Mr. Democrat politician, can you help us? And they'll be like, we'll see. And so when we really talk about building people power, it's this idea of not believing in the two wings of the same bird. Because today, well, we're not talking about being left or right. We're from the bottom, and we're coming for the top. Because there's too many people that are poor and too many smaller groups of people that are controlling our communities. So that's what we talk about when we say people power. Make some noise if you feel that.
Yeah.
Right? And, today, we're going to be clear on which side we're on.
Let's go.
Yo, we put our fist up. This is y'all can do it with us if you want. This is our symbol of resistance, and we still keep that story alive. See, I gotta draw the line. I can't take it no more. If you ain't down with revolution, what you waiting for? Making money for suckers in our communities poor. Ripping flags off of coffins, man, this ain't our war. Colonize, terrorize by the world's biggest killers. The U.S. government, the biggest weapon and drug dealers. To the prisons with children incarcerating the future. MySpace and Facebook that is stuck in computers. Stuck on stupid vocal music that's abusive to the short use. The nonsense that they spitting, we just listen and absorb it. Going out with broken, I'm a giant in the road. With the opera, and we hold the machete.
I rock hard in Palestinian children holding slingshots. With every single kid that's down for hip-hop. Come on, the culture, the life, what it really stands for. This music is resistance, it's the voice of the poor. On the side of the workers, the teachers, the lunch ladies. On the streets, the brown mommies raising out brown babies. I'm with youth organizers cleaning up the Bronx River. Caime Escalante when I stand and deliver. I'm with Campos Morales, man, he running Bolivia. Distribution of the land so we can all live bigger. I'm with Hugo and Vidal, Grandmaster and Melly Man. With the Panthers up in Queens, justice for Sean Blair. With the Matronado, with the Head out of Rio. Freedom for Oscar Lopez, I began to appeal. With a Boom Jamal, with a San Shakur. With the Copas in it, Mocalique and a penny more. Which side are you on? Shot City, say it, which side are you on? The South Bronx, baby, which side are you on? From Puerto Rico, which side are you on?
From Venezuela.
Say it, which side are you on?
Con Palestina.
Which side are you on?
Con las mujeres.
Which side are you on?
Con todo el pueblo.
Which side? I'm for telling the truth, exposing the lies. Think about the dead soldiers when you're driving your ride. The people die for the oil, and daddy pushes the van. I'm with the widows, the children, and the lonely best friends. For families staying together as one. I'm not for the raid or the deportation. I'm with people for them and the MIR. So watch out for the sisters in that unmarked car. And for little San Rico, we gon' fight for your mom. So we gon' shout it out twice in one song. I'm for 12 million workers in the VIDF. For a world without borders and a better tomorrow. Better tomorrow. Yeah, I was feeling how you started the day with making sure we greet each other. Can we do that one more time? Because I feel like some people arrived after that. If y'all,
say what up.
I know some of y'all already greet each other. Do it again. It's all good. Show love, show love. Hey, it's like this. Hey, I like that shit. There were some people that did show love.
Hey, I like my dude that he says, jam your hands together. I'm gonna start using that, G.
So, we could talk a million things about being against racism, imperialism, capitalism, neoliberalism, sexism, ism. We could talk all day about the isms we oppose, but if we don't start by building with our neighbor, by building with that person that we see outside of our apartment building or our dorm room or our workplace or our school place or the person that we see every day at the bus stop, if we don't start by building community with our close neighbors, with the people to our left, our right, we ain't talking about nothing. Because too often the oppressor, the people that create all these isms and all these structures of oppression, they want us to feel alone. They want you to feel alone. They want you to feel like you crazy when you questioning that system. So when we greet each other and we show love, it's about going against that grain and showing that we as a people, as oppressed people, we're willing to be able to build love and trust because the oppressor doesn't have time for that. Capitalism doesn't have time for love and trust. So we're doing that today. We're building community, getting to know each other. And we're not gonna let the system call us crazy when we question that system because when you think about having billions of people in poverty with no housing, education, or food or water, I think that system is a little crazy.
Yo, I promise I would rap like a superstar rap. Spit like a monster, put myself on the map. Say it first rap in English, then rap in Spanish. Yo, que lo que tú dices, boy? I cause damage, international, worldwide resistance in my lyrics. Walking down these main streets to the house of spirits. Yo represento lo que canto mis canciones. Amor, justicia, hip hop, revoluciones. Listen here, we done preaching to the choir. Yep. We stayed on the block, took the neighborhood higher. I guess I just listened to the little boy speaking. The one that said, never deny what you seeking. It made me a believer, que todo es posible. We flow como la lucha, siempre sigue. They call it ADT when you're wildin' and don't listen. They make you think you're crazy when you question they system. Crazy, cause I look different than you. Fuck me at the corner of your peripheral. Crazy, like I'm the violent one, living in the empire that was born at the gun. And that's crazy, what I'm supposed to do when they shut the soul down and ain't no food. And that's crazy, like I'm the violent one, living in the empire that was born at the gun. And that's crazy, like I lost my marbles, like all I wanna do is criticize and argue. Like my school's loose cause I say what I want to, and say what I got to it, por eso que canto. Queremos un cambio, en eso andamos. Yo creo caminos, yo creo en obstáculos. You say I'm loco, but need a doctor. I say let's be realistic and do the impossible. Check it out, I'm on a higher plane. Some say it ain't safe, I say it's okay. Let your mind sway, ride away. The death and all men is stuck in one place. They want you sedated, drugged and medicated. Paper in the pocket of the drug fabricators. All indicators show us society sitting. Disease by greed, that's the diagnosis. That's crazy, cause I look different than you. Fuck me, I had a polio peripheral. Crazy, I'm the violent one, living in the empire that was born out the gun. And that's crazy, what I'm supposed to do when they shut the store down and ain't no food. That's crazy, like I'm the violent one, living in the empire that was born out the gun. Crazy, that's crazy, that's crazy.
Man, we've been rocking as a group for 12 years already. I want to share, Brother Carlos brought us out in like 2007, so we were just talking. Shout out to this brother right here for making it happen and bringing us out. We've been doing bilingual music, so I feel the whole sentiment of kind of like ni de aquí, ni de allá. I really feel that immigrant experience that y'all was talking about. But we about to put out a new album that's all in Spanish. It's for the first time. We've always done like bilingual music, but we decided to do a whole album in Spanish. It's called America versus America with 3 Ks. And the first single is one we're gonna perform. We've barely performed this. It features our friend from Chile named Ana Tijoux. And it's called Iva Caer. And Iva Caer in English means it's gonna fall. And that's how we feel about this government. That's how we feel about those walls that they're talking about building. It's all gonna fall eventually. So it's called Iva Caer, which means it's gonna fall. Let's go.
La producción industrial se ha desplomado en Estados Unidos. Los bancos centrales habían generado un riesgo altísimo para el sistema bancario, que la deuda acumulada era enorme y que se produciría un desplome del sistema. Iva Caer, Iva Caer, Iva Caer, Iva
Mi manera de pensar, el camino se hace al andar, mirando el mar de lejos solo veo tu reflejo. Los ladrillos son de barro, construyendo cambio, captivando la conciencia de los jóvenes del barrio. Si no lo vivo, ¿cómo lo aprendo? Si no trabajo, ¿cómo lo arriendo? Tiene la gana, pues ponle empeño. Tiene moneda, pues dale al fuego. Somos los pobres buscando un sueño, somos los pobres tumbando el dueño, somos los pobres poder populares, si no la pobla se muere de hambre. Movimiento por la tierra, llevando la bandera, derrumbando lo que manda, es inicio de una nueva era donde el pueblo manda. Te recuerdo, Amanda, te recuerdo trabajando hasta que el imperio caiga. Y va a caer, y va a caer, y va a caer. Cantando Dios general, después de eso nada fue igual. Las manos del tiempo no vuelven atrás, las manos visibles no siguen queriendo llevar el agua como la plata. Antes que toda se caiga, como una acción de barata, sin pedir que pasa mañana. Toda la voz se suba y eso burbujas se ploma, no baja nota. Así van las cosas, olvida tu cosa, no olvides nada, sigue en la hora. Con un castillo de arena, agarra la pala, trabaja la tierra, porque ya estamos en guerra. Ahora hay que defender lo que nos queda, solo familia, vecinos, tu chuta, tus seres queridos. Así que pueda llevar sobre el vecino, el mercado se deja el olvido. Esa casa de leyes se cae, con los vientos violentos que vienen, veremos los cambios que traen. Venceremos mi ejército y va a caer. Y va a caer. Y va a caer. Y va a caer.
And as all crumbles and it all falls down, we need to be clear that we need to create something together that's going to replace this system that's going to fall. It's up to us to create that together, y'all. Come on.
Y aunque caigan los muros, y aunque caiga la ciudad, que se caigan sus banderas, la guerra pertenece a quien la libera.
We all jump for y'all, like this. Uno, dos, tres, va a caer. Y va a caer.
DJ Illinois on the ones and twos.
Y'all make some noise.
For those that came to the workshop earlier, make some noise if you were at the workshop earlier. All right. Well, that's what we talked about. Is the foundation of hip hop culture is what you see right here is the DJ. You know what I'm saying? A lot of young folks, they've lost the craft, but this is a turntable. You feel me? We go to a lot of shows, they be having the little situations. We be carrying the big old turntables, but that's that we do it because we want to keep that culture alive. You know what I mean? Because the reality is that when hip hop first emerged, you know what I mean? Hip hop comes out in a historical moment, post-civil rights era, when there was huge cutbacks. You know what I'm saying? We talked about this earlier at the workshop. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was common to see kids in the hood walking with a trumpet, a guitar, because there was music programs. But once those music programs got cut, as that's where hip hop emerges, when we make something out of nothing, right? So we turned a playback device into an instrument, you know what I'm saying? And that's the power of hip hop, is that we may not have much resources, but we gonna invent some shit, and that's really what happened with this right here. Make some noise for the DJ, y'all. Huh? Do you have the song Ghoul instrumental? I want to do something fun because I feel like it's intimate. When we first moved to New York, man, I'm not gonna front, we was always trying to get on shows. I was the type of MC, I would just go to a show hoping somebody would call somebody up. You know what I mean? And I would seize that moment. And I always kind of disliked the whole like celebrity culture of like, oh, these are the openers, and these are the people that are gonna close out the show.
These are the fans, these are the performers.
So what we want to do, we want to do this. We always do a cypher in our show, which we invite people up to rock with us. So if you blessed the stage tonight, I don't care if you did poetry, if you did, I want you to come up. Just join us, even if you don't rock. I just want you on stage with us.
We want to do like a little improvisation.
So my brothers from Niger, where y'all at, man? Y'all come up and join us. If you was hosting, just join us on the stage. You don't gotta
y'all can
freestyle.
rap too. We gonna hand y'all the mic.
Yeah,
if you wanna
ideally you
join
can
us.
rap. If not, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
We want everybody to join us on stage because that's if we're not talking about unity amongst artists, amongst people, we're not talking about nothing. So we want to do that right now. Where's the brother that was up here earlier?
My man's chilling. He chilling.
Where he go? Tell him to come back. Where he'll figure it out.
Y'all make some noise for Verbal Mayhem, the young ladies that joined us and kicking it with us, and the brother that's hosting.
So
they gonna build.
So look, so this is not your normal cipher. We gonna do a cipher in honor of one of my favorite languages.
Oh, what's
so
that?
I'm gonna keep it 100. I speak 6 languages.
I hope one of them is French.
No, hold up. Je parle français.
Nah.
Je parle français.
Nah, you can't.
Je tout dit le français.
You can't front on in this
Hold
room.
on, I speak English, regular English.
That's one, okay.
I speak Spanish.
Dos.
Hablo español.
Dos.
Después hablo español chileno, que no va completamente diferente a lo que hablo.
Chileno, español chileno,
That's a whole
son tres.
different language. That's 3. I'm fluent in the language of lawyer, professor, and police officer, because you know that's some whole different shit.
That's a different language.
You know what I mean? You get
Sorry,
paid.
professor.
I'm sorry, officer. You know what I mean? You switch it up on them. That's language number 4.
That's 4?
Yeah.
I'm keeping count. Go ahead.
Then I speak the international language of hip hop. You know what I mean? Because that's the language we go.
That's what we was talking the
I go
same
perform.
language.
I just came to perform. I was performing in Greece. I don't know how to speak Greek, but we connected. I perform in Germany. I don't speak German, but we connected. You know, so that's 5.
Hip hop.
And the 6th language, which we speak every day in the South Bronx, is my favorite lenguaje, which is Spanglish.
Spanglish.
So this is gonna be a Spanglish cipher.
Come on.
All right?
Explain that, bro.
All right, so this is gonna be the hook. So I go to like English speaking shows and people are like, hey, you guys sound good.
Sound good.
I'm like, that's what's up.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you. I go to other shows in like Latin America and they go, oye, ustedes suenan bien.
Suenan bien.
Then I be in my hood in the Bronx and the OGs be like, hey, you song good.
Song good.
So
good is
the
Spanglish.
title of this cipher is Song Good.
Song good.
Which is Spanglish for
Sounds good.
Sounds good. I'm just making this shit up as we go along.
All
You
right,
have a good time.
all right.
Y'all having a good time? That's all
Yes.
that matters, right?
They're kicking it.
So the title of this cipher is Song Good.
Song good.
All right? So when we ask y'all, sueno bien, como sueno, everybody here from the front to the back is gonna speak Spanglish today, and y'all gonna say song good. Song good.
Song good.
All right? Y'all with that? That's gonna be the hook. All right? Yeah, we gonna make this shit work, trust me. All right? So give me a beat, Illa. Give me like a little cipher beat. Okay, all right, that's good, little cipher beat. All right, go like this. Hey, you ready? You ready? Set me off? Let me get up. Yo. Sueno bien, como sueno.
So good.
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 Yo, do I sound? Do I really sound nice? Do I really sound like I'm about to kill it on this mic device? Say it. En cualquier lenguaje soy un salvaje, above average savage in any language. I cause damage like you're wearing old school clothes. Freestyle assassin and I'm out of parole. I just drove here and I ain't paid for the toll. I said I'ma holler at y'all later, cause I'm swole. It's like I just drank a little bit of water. I just wish that Bush would've sent his daughters off to war. Freestyle assassin with the ill metaphor. I don't get drunk no more. Como agua, that's H2O. That's ROD stars with the illo flow. And I just came to kick it out. The verbal, lit. Grab microphones, I got hits.
Sueno bien, como sueno. So good.
Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno.
So good. Sueno bien, como sueno. She got it. Come on. She got it.
Follow that. I don't even know if I'm on beat. Verbal Mayhem. Give me every Wednesday.
Como bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno.
to one toe. That door, check up on the phone. Sorry, baratone, I got to know. There's a guy in the zone. I got one goes. I'm at the yarrow. I got come on, niggas are a Jerry Kangarato. I said, folks, I got to man it so. I got a get I got a gem. It's a down. What did I get?
Hey, sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Oh, parece que me toca a mí, sí. I was trying to be the MC, but see, I will rap and rock this track for a second. I reckon we getting closer, it's about to be over, but we've been sharing for a while in the workshop. It don't stop, we will study the history of hip-hop, plus how we against capitalism and populism and all the isms. That's how we kill it, yo. One more time, I want y'all to make some noise. For the DJ in the back, DJ hell no! Sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Sueno bien como sueno. Make some noise for everybody up here.
Verbal Mayhem.
Appreciate y'all joining.
Peace, y'all. One love. That was awesome.
All right, that song is not found on any CD. Huh? Yeah. Hey, so, go ahead, do your little story. He does a story before every time we perform this song.
It's not a story. It's when we in colleges, I like to do a little quiz to make sure the college students are learning. So this is my first question in the quiz. What's the state fruit in Georgia? Very good. Rutgers is doing this thing. All right, so, okay, peaches, cool. Georgia, peaches. What's the state fruit in Washington?
Manzanas.
Apples, very good.
Oh, apples, right.
Don't sound so unsure. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. All right, so cool. Peaches, apples. Why in the world am I talking about peaches and apples at a hip-hop show sponsored by the French department at Rutgers? It's like this.
Situations, we be carrying the big old turntables, but that's that we do it because we want to keep that culture alive, you know what I mean? Because the reality is that when hip-hop first emerged, you know what I mean, hip-hop comes out in a historical moment, post-civil rights era, when there was huge cutbacks. You know what I'm saying? We talked about this earlier at the workshop. Back in the 50s and 60s, it was common to see kids in the hood walking with a trumpet, a guitar, because there was music programs. But once those music programs got cut, as that's where hip-hop emerges, when we make something out of nothing, right? So we turned a playback device into an instrument, you know what I'm saying? And that's the power of hip-hop, is that we may not have much resources, but we gonna invent some shit, and that's really what happened with this right here. Make some noise for the DJ, y'all. Huh? Do you have the song Ghoul instrumental? I want to do something fun because I feel like it's intimate. When we first moved to New York, man, I'm not gonna front, we was always trying to get on shows. I was the type of MC, I would just go to a show hoping somebody would call somebody up. You know what I mean? And I would seize that moment. And I always kind of disliked the whole like celebrity culture of like, oh, these are the openers, and these are the people that are gonna close out the show.
These are the fans, these are the performers.
So what we want to do this. We always do a cypher in our show, which we invite people up to rock with us. So if you blessed the stage tonight, I don't care if you did poetry, if you did, I want you to come up. Just join us, even if you don't rock. I just want you on stage with us.
We want to do like a little improvisation.
So my brothers from Niger, where y'all at, man? Y'all come up and join us. If you was hosting, just join us on the stage. You don't gotta
y'all can rap too. We gonna hang out on mic.
Yeah, ideally you can rap. If not, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
We want everybody to join us on stage, because if we're not talking about unity amongst artists, amongst people, we're not talking about nothing. So we want to do that right now. Where's the brother that was up here earlier?
My man's chilling. He chilling.
Where'd he go? Tell him to come back. He'll figure it out.
Y'all make some noise for Verbal Mayhem, the young ladies that joined us and kicking it with us. And the brother that's hosting.
So
they gonna build.
So look, so this is not your normal cypher. We gonna do a cypher in honor of one of my favorite languages.
Oh, what's
so
that?
I'm gonna keep it 100. I speak 6 languages.
I hope one of them is French.
No, hold up. Je parle français.
Nah.
Je parle français.
Nah, you can't.
Je te dis le français.
You can't front on in this
Oh, no,
room.
I don't. I speak English, regular English.
That's one, okay.
I speak Spanish.
Dos.
Hablo español.
Dos.
Después hablo español chileno, que no va completamente diferente a lo que le hablo.
Chileno, español chileno,
That's a whole
son
different
tres.
That's 3. I'm fluent in the language of lawyer, professor, and police officer, because you know that's some whole different shit.
That's a different language.
You know what I mean? You get
Sorry, professor.
I'm sorry, officer. You know what I mean? You switch it up on them. That's language number 4.
That's 4?
Yeah.
I'm keeping count. Go ahead.
Then I speak the international language of hip hop.
Hip hop.
You know what I mean? Because that's the language we go.
That's what we was talking.
I
The
go
same
perform.
language.
I just came to perform. I was performing in Greece. I don't know how to speak Greek, but we connected. I perform in Germany. I don't speak German, but we connected. You know, so that's 5.
Hip hop.
And the 6th language, which we speak every day in the South Bronx, is my favorite lenguaje, which is Spanglish.
Spanglish.
So this is gonna be a Spanglish cipher.
Come on.
All right.
Explain that, bro.
All right, so this is gonna be the hook. So I go to like English speaking shows, and people are like, "Hey, you guys sound good."
Sound good.
I'm like, "That's what's up."
Thank you.
Thank you. I go to other shows in like Latin America, and they go, "Oye, ustedes suenan bien."
Suenan bien.
Then I be in my hood in the Bronx, and the OGs be like, "Hey, you song good."
Song good.
So
good is
the
Spanish.
title of this cipher is Song good.
Song good.
Which is Spanglish for
sounds good.
Sounds good. I'm just making this shit up as we go along.
All
You
right,
have a good time.
all right.
Y'all having a good time? That's all that matters, right?
They're kicking it.
So the title of this cipher is Songu.
Songu.
All right. So when we ask y'all, sueno bien, como sueno, everybody here from the front to the back is gonna speak Spanglish today, and y'all gonna say Songu. Songu.
Songu.
All right. Y'all with that? That's gonna be the hook. All right. Yeah. We gonna make this shit work. Trust me. All right. So give me a beat. Look, give me like a little cipher beat. Okay, all right, that's good, little cipher beat. All right, go like this. Hey, you ready? You ready to set me off? Let me get on the beat. All right, go. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Yo, do I sound? Do I really sound nice? Do I really sound like I'm about to kill it on this mic device? Say it. En cualquier lenguaje soy un salvaje, above average, savage in any language. I cause damage like you wearing old school clothes. Freestyle assassin and I'm out of parole. I just drove here and I ain't paid for the toll. I said I'ma holler at y'all later, cause I'm swole. It's like I just drank a little bit of water. I just wish that Bush would've sent his daughters off to war. Freestyle assassin with ill metaphor. I don't get drunk no more. Como agua, that's H2O. That's ROD stars with the illo flow. And I just came to kick it out with the verbal, lit. Grab microphones, I got hits. Sueno bien, como sueno. So good. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. So good. Sueno bien, como sueno.
She got it, come on. She got it.
Follow that. I don't even know if I'm on beat. Verbal mayhem, give me every Wednesday.
Como bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno.
Wato, trompeta do, check up on the phone. Sorry, preparato, nigga, no. The Zanka kind of set, so nigga, one goes, I'm at the Yaro. Nigga, can't come on, nigga, sort of nigga, Jerry, and Garato. I said, folk, nigga, oh, man, it's so. Zanka, nigga, against Yaro. Nigga, they came, and said, no, what did I get?
Hey, sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Sueno bien, como sueno. Oh, parece que Me toca a mí, see, I was trying to be the MC, but see, I'm gonna rap and rock this track for a second. I reckon we getting closer, it's not to be over, but we've been jamming for a while in the workshop. It don't stop, we were studying the history of hip hop, plus how we against capitalism and populism and all the isms. That's how we kill it, yo. One more time, I want you to make some noise for the DJ in the back. DJ in the noise. Suena bien como sueno. Suena bien como sueno. Suena bien como sueno. Suena bien como sueno.
Make some noise for everybody up here.
Verbal mayhem.
Appreciate y'all joining.
Peace, y'all. One love. That was awesome.
All right, that song is not found on any CD. Huh? Yeah. Hey, so, go ahead, do your little story. He does a story before every time we perform this song.
It's not a story. It's when we in colleges, I like to do a little quiz to make sure the college students are learning. So this is my first question in the quiz. What's the state fruit in Georgia? Very good. Rutgers is doing this thing. All right, so, okay, peaches, cool. Georgia, peaches. What's the state fruit in Washington?
Manzanas.
Apples, very good.
Oh, apples, right.
Don't sound so unsure. It's like, oh, I'm not sure. All right, so cool. Peaches, apples. Why in the world am I talking about peaches and apples at a hip-hop show sponsored by the French department at Rutgers? It's like this. I don't know.